4646 Clark Road, Bath, Michigan, 48808. Ken's phone number, area code 517-641-6149. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on June 18th, 1990. This is tape number 1 of 3 tapes. Okay, Ken, maybe you could just start, if you would, with your name and your address and your phone, please.
My name's Ken Ricks, and I live at 4646 Clark Road, which is just inside the township of Bath, about a mile from the village.
Okay.
I have an 80-acre farm, kind of a hobby farm.
What's your phone number there?
My phone number is 641-6149.
Okay. Now, take us back, if you would, Ken, to when you started and where you started and what was going on.
Well, it was in March, the 19th of March, 1941, that I had been working as a fixture worker and applied at the Oldsmobile forge plant, which was just starting at that particular time.
Okay.
And, well, they weren't hiring too many people at that time. I wanted to hire in as a journeyman tool worker.
Okay.
So I hired in instead as a production worker.
Oh, all right.
My first job was put to sweeping, to sweep up around some machines and tear down the barricades around the vertical lathes that were just put into operation for shell machining.
Was the plant running at that time, or?
No, the plant was just getting into operation.
All right. So
there were a couple of bliss presses that were going to put the noses on the shells, and Excello vertical lathes.
Yeah.
Which were so new that no one knew anything about them, which
yeah.
probably was lucky for me.
Yeah.
Walt Clippard at that time was a superintendent of the shell machining.
Okay.
Well, I guess he was an assistant at that time because Emil Rohrbeck was the superintendent.
Okay.
And Emil at that time, he left about that time and went to the Nash people.
Nash Kelvinator.
Nash Kelvinator here in Lansing and Warwick.
Yeah.
Well, no one seemed to know how to use micrometers or gauges of any nature. They had no ideas of how to set up or grind tools even.
All right.
Most
of the people were kind of green grass, so to speak, to that sort of
That's
activity.
Correct. So rapidly, we went from being a guy tearing down a barricade about an hour to proving they could use a lathe.
Okay.
A setup man before the day was over.
Oh my Lord! A fast day.
A fast day. We operated those Excello vertical lathes, bliss presses, and then they brought the rigid turners in.
Okay, what did they do?
Well, a rigid turner was an 8-station unit that went around and cut the shells to finished size.
Okay.
The Excello vertical lathes took off the rough units.
All right.
Just to the outside.
Okay.
Trimmed the ends and gave the rough dimensions.
Okay.
Then your rigid turners cut the ogive and the shell as it should be, or where it would go on down.
Fine machine.
Right.
Did a fine machining job.
And where it would go down to pick up a band and be pressed on, and then turned and the band turning, finish the shells.
Okay.
We were building the 75 millimeter and 105 millimeter shells.
Okay.
But it was probably mid-April before we got into good operation.
All right.
Shells.
Were we also forging those there, Ken?
Yes, they were.
Okay. So they were doing the whole thing.
Yes, that was done in the hammer shop. They called them upsetters.
Okay. Do you remember whereabouts in the plant these things were happening?
Oh yeah, this was the old Rhinebone factory, as you recall.
Yeah.
And at that particular time, shell machining was situated pretty much to the southwest section of the plant, while the hammer shop was over on the northwest portion of it.
Okay.
They brought the steel in from the yard. They used to saw it. That was too slow.
Okay.
Then someone devised a method of nick and break, they called it.
Uh-huh.
They just took a acetylene torch and took a mark across the steel, which was quite heavy
Yeah.
stuff, and held into a press unit, and down come a boom and hit it, and I was sheared off just as
snapped it, kind of.
It was kind of a snap, that's
Mhm.
right, but it sheared it as clean as a whistle.
I'll be darned.
And then they would put it into the furnaces and bring it up, and then upset it.
Okay.
Now Bud Miller was in on that upsetting stuff.
Yeah. Okay. And then what was at the very east end of that plant then?
Well, the very east end of that plant was pretty well taken up with the north section of it was office section,
Okay.
and not too big.
Yeah.
And then going out into that, let's see, we had a little tooling deal there that Pierce, a little by the name of Pierce,
Okay.
superintended.
Is that like a tool room sort of?
Right. And the very south end of it was taken up more or less in conference rooms,
All right.
and the tooling section of it,
Okay.
the tool grinding
All
section
right.
was in there too.
Okay. Was there any new construction going on at that? I mean, building construction going on? when you started?
Not that I can recall when I first went in there.
Okay.
Oh, not too much.
Okay.
Ken Plaster, I believe, was the guy that was in the head over there with, he was kind of the general superintendent with
All right.
C.B. Dakin
Mm-hmm.
being the top cheese. We used to think he
Yeah.
was the manager, but I guess this really was.
Yeah. Did you think of yourselves as being part of Oldsmobile or part of something else at that point in time?
Kids at that time, as I recall it, I was just damn grateful for a job.
Okay.
You didn't think of being Oldsmobile or otherwise.
All right. Do you remember what you hired in at?
You mean for
Salary?
wages?
Yeah.
Oh, 67 cents an hour.
67 cents.
And at the end of the day, I think I was getting 93.
Oh, really?
Well, you went up fast.
I guess. 50% raise in a day.
Yeah, it was around August. I went on as a hourly foreman at about $1.35.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you stayed then in the machining floor from early in April until August?
I stayed in the machine floor from the time I went in
Uh-huh.
until I left in 1945.
Okay. So you as a foreman were on the machining floor.
I was a foreman for the first year and a general foreman thereafter.
Okay. All right. You mentioned you were an hourly foreman?
An hourly foreman first.
Okay.
They put you on hourly at that particular time and would use you, for 2-3 months, and before they determined whether they could put you on salary.
Okay.
Then you took a cut in wages.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
That's an interesting problem.
I think I'm pretty sure it was $225 a month, which
When you went on salary.
when I went on salary, and I don't recall the exact date when I went on salary, but it was in the first year portion of it.
Okay. Now, was there a lot, Ken, were you working heavy overtime or what was happening from a standpoint of work?
For the first year that I worked there, until I went on salary as a foreman, I worked as a foreman on the floor, and I would spend lots of time on the weekends helping to revise machinery.
Okay.
I got a lot of overtime. I got all the work I could possibly use.
All right.
Lee Brown, called Lee Brown?
Oh, no.
Well, he later on became Brown's Construction.
Oh, the Brown
Brothers
Yeah,
Construction.
okay, yeah.
Lee and I hired in about the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
for a period of time, as general foreman, we split a shift.
Oh, really?
They didn't have anybody for the shift, so he would take the day shift and part of the afternoon shift, and I would take from the second part of the afternoon shift to the morning.
Okay.
That didn't last too long.
So you were really the plant was running 3 shifts right around
That's
the
right.
clock.
We started. I was quite demand for shells at that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, all this was before the war started.
Well,
because the war didn't really start till December 7th.
No, the war started on December 7th of 1940.
41.
41?
Yeah.
I guess it was.
So you were
Oh, we were making preparation deals.
making shells 6 months, 8 months?
But you weren't getting that many shells out at that particular
Okay.
time, you know. And Shell Plant 1 started, and then let's see, Ray Carter was a general foreman there at that time.
Well, this was over at Plant 1?
Ray left us and went over to the main plant, Shell Plant 2, they called it,
Okay,
where they set up rigid turners
all right.
and the Excello vertical lathes.
Right.
We'd made some real improvements in those Excello vertical lathes by that time.
Mm-hmm.
When they first started, they run with a gear, and they didn't have any protection for chips. When a chip would go behind the gear, and a cam was running down the cam unit,
Yeah.
you were apt to either have an outburst or an indentation in the shell. Most of the times it could ruin it.
Yeah.
It took them about 3 months to get that thing straightened out and get to put hydraulics in there instead of gears. Well, I was asked the first day I went there if I could run a lathe, and I said I could. So they took me down to see if I could. I could, a federal lathe. And they wanted to know how I knew about a vertical lathe. I said I'd never heard of one.
Mm.
Well, he said, well, at least you're honest. Nobody else had either. So I become the setup man on the vertical lathe, of which I'd taken the barricade off the first one.
Yeah, yeah. So people were just basically learning the whole thing from scratch.
Oh, they were just starting to hire people in. Thinking of Bender. I think Bender was over there as a clerk for the
Orland
Bender.
Yeah.
Paul Kramer was working with him. Paul later on became one of our foremen, a general foreman.
Yeah.
He was a clerk in the superintendent's office for years. Right. Retired out of the assembly plant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did were there any people there, Ken, that kind of, I would call them, quote, knew what they were doing, so to speak, that were old timers that had been through that sort of thing?
Oh, no, they were some old timers there. OB rounds, for an example, in the tool room.
Okay.
He was pretty knowledgeable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he later on became the superintendent of tooling there.
Yeah.
And there was Norm Rohrbeck.
Okay.
There was Emil's brother, but
All
that didn't make any deal. He was a real mechanic. Some of our machine people were pretty knowledgeable.
Okay. Was there anybody there that had worked in the foundry when it was a foundry by any chance? From
No, not
20
to
years
my
earlier?
knowledge.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. It had been wiped out.
Yeah, of course, went out of business a long time before, but
Completely revamped.
Yeah.
They put the floors onto the thing. They set these wood block floors.
Okay.
Put them in with tar.
Yeah.
And then they water running off of the roof come so hard one time that all the way through the plant we raised those floors sometimes 6 foot off the floor. And then some guy get a brilliant idea and go up and knock a block out. Water would go through the ceiling. Oh, sure.
My goodness.
It was some mess.
I can imagine. Okay, so as the war wore on, then what happened?
Well,
what were you doing?
They gradually got a workforce in there. I think I doubt very much that there was much over 100 people working there when I first went there.
Okay.
There was opportunities. You asked about work opportunities early. If we so desired to do so, after we put in 8 hours in the shell machining, we could go over and work as heaters.
Oh, okay.
People getting started in the forging and part of it. I worked at that a few times, but that's pretty hot work.
Yeah.
Fellows used to wear underwear and they were saturated with sweat.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
It wasn't the worst part of it. The worst part of it was when they'd come back and put them on in the morning.
little bit rank.
Well, yeah, I wasn't quite used to that sort of thing. I was carting an underwear in the morning and taking one home at night. Just in anticipation of working.
Yeah.
But we were grateful to get all the work we could.
Yeah.
Well, the second year, we got things going pretty well. They brought in the 105 millimeter shells. See, the first one was the 75s.
Okay.
When they got those operating, they set up for the 105s.
Okay.
Now that was set just to the west of where the 75s were operating.
They sort of still in the southwest part of the.
Yes. Down in the shell machining area there, they also had heat treating furnaces.
Okay.
And oil quenchers.
All right.
How these shells would be laid on a tray and go through this oven. And when they get down, the fingers would come in and pick up a series of shells. I don't remember. It might have been 30 shells or so they would pick up and quench itself quick in the hot oil.
Okay.
Which at almost any given moment might burst into flame.
Oh my goodness.
First time it burst into flame, they had huge tanks of foam. Nobody ever was told how to use the foam.
Oh no.
Oh no, we didn't.
Yeah.
Later on in Oldsmobile, we set up fire brigades.
Sure.
I still got some badges at home from being a fire brigade member. But at that particular time, the fire brigades hadn't started. I remember a guy running down the aisle with a hose.
Water hose?
Water hose. And Lord of heavens, we couldn't stop him. So the best thing to do was to grab an axe. And I don't recall just who it was. And grab the axe. Cut the hose right to it.
So you wouldn't squirt water on
probably save some lives. As it was, they stood on each side of the big oil tank. Now these tanks were probably 15, 20 feet long and 8 foot wide. And they were filled with quenching oil, probably 4.5 foot deep.
Yeah.
This thing is firing up and the flames are going clear up into the rafters.
Yeah.
And when they started playing this foam, they put more on the machines on either side. and the guys that were doing the hosing than they did on the tanks. But we got the fire out.
Yeah. Was that a regular occurrence, a little fire in the quench tank? Or?
Oh, it happened numerous times until we finally got what they got eventually was carbon dioxide.
Oh.
Huge carbon dioxide.
Okay.
And it's so that the second that it flared up, it did it automatically. If the flame hit an area above, the carbon dioxide came in and smothered it. And it was done, and
nothing got hurt.
Oh, you didn't even stop work. Yeah. They'd hit often.
Yeah. I imagine after the foam, it was quite a mess.
Oh Lord, we were a day and a half cleaning up.
Yeah.
You'd walk around in there and slip over everything.
That makes some sense.
Oh Lord. We ran over with shell conveyors over the tops of heat ovens. And down. We were carrying a lot of shells because at that particular time we were operating. The Excelos were set up to build about 60 shells an hour. But as it stood, we ran about 97 an hour.
Okay.
I always like to see a little better production than what they anticipated. And this was going on by the end of the first year, it was going on a 24-hour basis.
Okay.
Bringing in a lot of people. Yeah. I think it was about 1942, possibly 3, to where it really got to be a dig to get people in there.
You were having trouble finding folks?
Well, we're pulling people into service.
Yeah.
I didn't go to service myself because I would have, but they found a hernia, which they told me to hurry and get fixed and come back a year later. And I went out of there saying,
Yeah, right.
yeah, what kind of an idiot do you take this lad for?
Right.
Well, now that must have been the tail end of 42 because my daughter was born in February of 1943.
Okay.
And the day that my wife brought her home from the hospital, I was down, I had a brood sow. We were getting started on the farm. I started to give her a pail of water and I got a strangulated hernia that darn near killed me.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. There was that hernia that they wanted me to get fixed.
You didn't get fixed.
But I got it fixed in a hurry at that particular time. They rushed me into the hospital and get it done immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That must have laid you off work for a while too. Then.
No, it didn't. I recall hernias were treated somewhat differently in those days.
Okay.
When you had a hernia, you stayed in bed for 10 days, which
Oh yeah.
entirely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Half the time when you got out of there, if you didn't get adhesions, you were lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get adhesions.
Yeah.
I was back to work in 10 days.
Okay. And
The stitch is still in me, but I hadn't reported to the doctor yet. And after I worked a week, I went to the plant doctor, and he said, "Well, you're all right." He said, "Now you stay off over the weekend." He said, "Monday, if they got something easy for you to do, well, you can come on back."
You forgot to tell him, huh?
I never did tell him. We operated a little differently in those days. We didn't get paid that well.
When you were off, Ken, did they pay you for the off time? How did that work in those days?
No, I don't recall being paid. I might have been. I wouldn't be too sure of that.
Okay. All right.
It's been too many years.
Yeah, just curious. Were you at that time? Were you covered by medical and those kinds of things?
Oh, we were covered by medical, but not the way we were later years. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the hernias, I recall, it was accepted at that time as an industrial deal because you just don't know where they did it.
Yeah. Because of all the lifting and those kinds of things.
I didn't have one when I came to work.
Yeah.
And I did have one after a year.
Well, were people teaching people how to do things safely in the plant at that time?
Oh, yes, they were. Yes, they were. Let's see, at that time, Harold Good was our personnel man, part of the personnel division, and to us, he was personnel.
Yeah.
And he later left us to become the Smucker's president, if you recall, when he married Smucker's only daughter.
Family, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right. But Harold Good was a wonderful chap, to my way of thinking. And he kind of took an attachment to me early, and I would go over to the Olds to learn the varied things and then teach. Got extra money for teaching people on the following shifts. So I was teaching for a while in 1941.
Oh, okay.
Along with other work.
What were you teaching?
Oh, we'd come over, and there was a chap over here by the name of Guy Hudson that was teaching the mathematics sections and functional work on vernier gauges and the instruments.
Okay.
Why, most people couldn't even use a micrometer.
Oh, yeah.
And we had to teach people to use micrometers properly.
Yeah.
Most individuals take a look at a micrometer and they use them like a C-clamp. Well, that's right. There was a delicacy that was needed there to function. Some people could instruct and others couldn't. I happened to be one of the guys that had a little luck in being able to instruct.
Yes. Was that kind of an irregular occurrence and they used fellows that were kind of willing, so to speak, for that sort of task?
Well, there weren't too many of us that did it. No, as far as I recall, there were only 3 people that did it to any extent over there. And most of them had experience outside.
Okay.
She had experience with micrometers and stuff before I came to Olds.
Yeah. Well, now was Good related to the safety side of the house then at that time?
Well, at that particular time, he performed those duties. I mean, he was a Harold Cutler
Okay,
type of guy.
yeah.
Actually, everything was responsible to him
Mm-hmm.
at that time. First that I can recall of our having a safety director, so to speak. Good Lord, run right back to pretty much to Bob Stone
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
when we first really got into safety
okay.
as a function.
Were the folks telling you how to lift things and how to keep your fingers out of pinch points and that kind of stuff in the early 40s?
Oh, there was some response to it, but not too much.
Okay. Safety glasses required?
Safety glasses were required in the forge plant.
Were
Oh, yes,
required.
right from very
Okay.
day one. And eventually hard hats.
Oh, okay.
The hard hat principle come kind of slow. Probably Bud Miller's probably already told you
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
They put them on the hammer shop people in the first place. They were more of a bunch of clowns than they were conscious of safety. I recall so vividly one guy that come down the aisle. He used to carry a big 10-inch crescent wrench in his overall pocket there. He'd reach down, get that crescent wrench, and come up and punk himself on the top of the head. Show you that it don't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And had a lad come along one day and picked that hat off his head and stuck his own hat on top of the guy's head.
Oh.
And he said, "How did you do that?" He pulled that thing out and he
Oh,
himself on the head. They weren't the brightest. They weren't the brightest. But hammermen weren't the world's brightest anyway, or they wouldn't have been in that business.
They had a lot of strength.
They were some massive individuals.
Mm-hmm.
They were tough.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good place to work.
No, women there at that time.
Well, we didn't have women, so to speak, at the start at all. I can't recall any of them in the first couple of years.
Okay.
Then gradually, let's see, we got into a grinding operation, or they were doing a little grinding, so
All right.
on. And Mike Minnow, who had been the superintendent of he came over with a heat treat and grinding situation.
Okay.
And they put some of these women to doing light grinding.
All right. This is not snake grinding, is it? It's regular
No,
cylindrical.
it was snake grinding.
Snake grinding?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was, but it was on the lighter shells.
All right.
And Mike came over with them. They didn't use women on heat treat. They started using women for sweepers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I would say probably it was probably 43 before they began to bring in a lot of women.
Okay.
And then we put them on the shell machining.
Okay.
They could run notching machines, which you put the notches on.
Mm-hmm.
They could do welding, welding a plate
Oh yeah.
on the end of the
Yeah.
shell.
Yeah.
Eventually, we got women doing band turning.
Mm-hmm.
This was all in 75 millimeter shells.
Yeah.
Didn't put any on 105.
Didn't have any over on 105.
Well, eventually we did.
Okay. All right.
Well, by the time 1945 got around there, we were scraping the bottom of the barrel, lifting the barrels away, and digging under to get people.
Mm-hmm. Because the war had sucked up so many.
That's
folks.
right.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And the women come in strong and begin to amaze people as to how much they actually could do.
Was that initially, Ken? Were there any problems associated with that?
With women?
With women in the workforce, yeah.
Well, some, I would say so, yes. They put some pretty strict ruling on women to begin with. They all had to wear coveralls.
Okay.
They all had to wear hats, as I remember, with snoods, they called them.
This little thing hanging
Yeah,
down.
all their hair had to be under the hat.
All right.
Well, that probably was the worst thing that you could do with women, is to have them put all their hair underneath the hat.
Yeah.
So you constantly find them cheating a little bit to look good.
Yeah.
They altered their uniforms quite a lot.
So they fit.
Oh,
the-
yes. Oh, yeah. Some of them took some drastic sewing alterations
Okay,
to make themselves look better.
yeah,
No, we had some women that were pretty comely women, I'll tell you.
yeah,
I remember a couple of, one of them was Miss Michigan.
interesting.
Only thing was, I can't remember her ever working.
Oh, she was just,
But,
as a
yes,
fixture. Uh-huh.
she became a fixture. Well, hey, listen, in 38 years there, I noted time after time that there was a really good-looking woman came into the plant. Invariably, she became an inspector.
Oh,
Oh yeah, they would grab them off in a hurry,
I see.
give them the easy, cushy jobs.
Uh-huh. Somebody else noticed.
Well, you've probably noticed it in offices and otherwise too.
Sure.
If a gal wants to come in and look good, she progressed pretty fast as a rule.
And did the women have special uniforms then that they wore?
Yeah, it was a coverall
Uh-huh.
type. No, it was an attractive coverall. I mean,
Did you remember any kind of badges or patches that they wore?
no, not in particular.
The so-called wings thing?
When they first came in there, they were required not to open the neck of the uniform more than one button,
All right.
keeping their hair underneath the snood.
Yeah.
They had to leave the sleeves on their deal. They could wear short sleeves,
Okay.
but they couldn't cut them out the armholes and all like
Yeah.
some would like to do.
Yeah.
We've had to send women home for that.
Yeah.
And in all, we held a pretty strict conduct situation with women and the men. They had to.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later on, I would say the beginning of 1945, before women began to loosen up on their wear. For a while, they let them have some of the hair off from underneath the hat, but they still had to wear the snood to
Yeah.
keep it out of machinery.
Yeah.
They had to wear the safety glasses. They got to the point to where they opened a couple of blouses, buttons on the blouse, and as long as they were ladylike, nobody protested.
Did the women get upset about any of the men's antics? How was that?
No, I never got a complaint from a woman.
Okay.
No, I got a few complaints from the men.
Oh, really?
Oh
That's
yeah,
interesting.
they thought that some of them were being catered to too much.
Oh, I see. From that side.
Yeah, they were doing more work than the women, getting the same amount of money.
Uh-huh. The wages were the same
Oh, the wages were the same.
for the same work.
Yeah.
Okay.
An interesting thing on wages, Jim. At 73 cents an hour, when they hired in, it got to be 76 cents an hour.
Yeah.
I don't know how the 3 cents came in there, but it did.
Okay.
The sweeper at that particular time worked for 51 cents an hour.
Oh,
25 cents difference
significant.
between being a sweeper and being a machine operator.
Uh-huh.
And the interesting thing about it is that when I left Olds, 1979, there was still a 25-cent differential between the line worker and the sweeper. Although at that particular time, I'm not positive of this, but it seemed to me the rate was getting close to $9
Uh-huh.
an hour. But the sweeper still got 25 cents
25
less.
cents less. Interesting. That is interesting.
So if you want to speak of what job progressed the best over the course of the years, I would say a sweeper.
Oh, he sure did. I mean, he went from big disparity to quite
Isn't
small.
it funny how that occurs?
Yeah.
Well, as we stated earlier there, the women came in with the idea in mind, you're going to have these women as long as the boys were in service.
Okay.
When the Army released men, so they came back to work, why women were going to be stopped hiring women, and then we would gradually release women
Okay.
until we get back to the point where you had all men again. Well, they become too much of a force in the Union.
The women did.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Consequently, person get elected in the Union, and you would immediately you begin to become a woman promoter.
Okay.
And well, this consequently they didn't release any women. They never quit hiring women, really.
Okay.
Although they did lessen the hiring procedure around 1945, first part of 45, and if I recall rightly, we stopped building shells around the latter part of August of 45.
Okay. So as the war started to wear down, the women hiring started to reduce.
Yes, and at that time, everybody was over the forge plant was let out on unemployment.
Oh, laid off.
Laid
sort
off.
of.
Now, I was a general foreman at that time, and I was sent home to use up my time, as they called it.
Is that the vacation, so to speak? Or
Oh,
what?
no, during the time, you could only work so many hours a week. With the salaried people, I got to the point to where we were paying double time to the hourly people for Sundays.
Yeah.
But if you were working on salary, the people that worked Sunday got paid straight time,
Oh,
and the double time, as you called it, was a day put in the bank.
okay.
So at the end of operation and shell machining, I think I had something like 137 days coming.
Wow. That you'd stashed away from this double time and
Well, this
time
is
and a half stuff.
things that I hadn't been paid for
Yeah. Uh-huh.
that had to be used up.
Wow.
And we used, well, I never did use them up. I think I used up somewhere around 70 days or something like that when I got called back to come down and work in the axle plant.
Okay, so the war quit and then the forge plant just kind of shut down.
That's right. Well, the forge plant shut down in its entirety.
Yeah, okay.
And the people from the forge plant that could be, it was absorbed back into Fisher Body and Oldsmobile.
All right.
And you see, because we were getting people from Fisher Body that were coming over. Matter of fact,
During the war.
my shell machining people, I had more people coming from Fisher Body than it was from Olds
Right.
or new hires.
Well, Fisher apparently was not making a lot of war production then.
Fisher, I don't recall if Fisher had any war production.
Okay.
Actually, Oldsmobile absorbed most of the Fisher people
All right.
into the Oldsmobile workforce.
Okay.
And shell machining absorbed a lot of those.
Mhm. So, Ken, I want to just kind of backing up a little bit, but how were labor relations and those kinds of things in those days during the war?
Well, you want to remember, in 1941, there wasn't any union. It was
Okay.
just getting started.
Yeah.
I recall, back very early in 41, the union had what they called stewards. They were encouraging people to join the union,
Okay.
which most of us couldn't see any particular reason for it.
Okay.
But eventually it was suggested that we ought to become a part of it. It would make it better all the way through for the plant. I mean, this was supervision encouraging you to do so. It was cheap to join the union at that time. I think it cost you $2
Wow.
to be and
Yeah.
the dues were very, very light. Without even trying on the thing, I remember I was elected to be a top committeeman. April or May, 41.
Okay.
Which time I was called down to C.B. Dakin's office and he said I was on the wrong team, and I said I hadn't seen any overtures toward being on the team I would prefer to be on to. And it was very shortly after that I became the hourly foreman.
See, okay.
I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it,
It has.
but
Well, was the union such that it was adversarial at that time? Or
no,
were they all?
not at all. No, actually, it needed something like that because there were some things that needed to be improved.
Okay.
And instead of everybody yelling for it, it was better to speak for a spokesman, have a spokesman do it.
All right.
Now, Fred Barrett, you recall Fred Barrett very well. Fred Barrett became a top committeeman right after I rejected the job. And he remained a top committeeman for, I think, 2.5 years before he was placed in the salary deal.
He eventually became part of labor relations.
Part of labor relations. Fred was a good arbitrator. And he did a lot of good for the people and for the company. But you needed somebody that was reasonable.
Yeah.
And you know, I always maintain, and I still maintain, that if you got a reasonable union, they're easier to work with than no union at all. Because there's nothing the matter with the fact that people will speak to someone of their problems, not in management. And if that person is a reasonable person, you can bring up that situation and you can discuss it, you can correct it.
Yeah.
And it really works out well. It's only when unions get radical that they're a problem to a company.
Yeah.
But my experience over the years,
Sure.
they were easy to get along with, really, if you're a reasonable person. I remember Sam Donahue used to worry about individuals if they got to be a power in the union.
Oh,
Well, really, those people weren't a problem. You had to understand them. They were just doing a deal. They were trying to do a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fred Smith, for an example, would later on become a union leader.
Sure.
Well, Fred was a good man. Only if Fred had an audience of 2, he became an orator. But on a one-to-one basis, he was one of the easiest people to talk to and operate with that you could possibly find.
Yeah.
I tried to tell Sam, work on the basis of talking to Fred and get him to, you inject your ideas to him, but don't try to press them on him. And the following day, I say to him, that was a pretty good idea you had yesterday. And give him credit for the idea, even though you injected it to him, and he become your champion.
Sure. Good idea.
Well, that's the way it worked anyway. Yeah. I remember a guy over in the forge plant saying to me, golly sakes, he said, how do you get on supervision? Well, there's 2 ways. One is to be so good they can't ignore you. The second one is to skate the fence as an outlaw.
Okay.
Don't be bad enough they're going to can you, but be bad enough that you are a troublesome individual. And then change. Maybe you get a different foreman. Even ask for a different spot because you can't get along with the guy you're with. Now you're with a new guy. Be like the first fellow. Just be indispensable. And that fellow will sing your praises so loud and become your champion that you're bound to rise. Yeah, you know, I've seen that work 1,000 times. And it's the easiest way to do it. Sometimes I think people who don't get on supervision must be idiots.
Yeah. Well, there's some truth to it.
Will become a little more difficult when you found people who got there that way anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. They're right. Ken C.B. Dakin. What about, can you tell us about him a little bit? We don't know a lot about him.
Well, I didn't know a great deal about C.B. Dakin except the times that I met him, and I always liked him. I always thought he was a reasonable sort of an individual and pleasant. talk to. I don't know how he was with his group that was in immediate command or anything.
Yeah.
As I recall, he had a false leg. He'd lost a leg, and he used to come through the plant. He'd always come through on a cart. But he really was a nice individual to talk with, and he was with us for about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Never any problems with CP taken.
Sure.
If he thought there was a problem, he would ask a group to come on up to his office and just talk.
Mm-hmm.
You got a problem? Let's hear it.
Okay.
And then he'd get back out on the floor with the people and say, let's see what we can do to resolve this.
So he was kind of a people sort of.
Well, that's the way I was always impressed with him. Now, some other people might have had a different impression of him.
Yeah.
But then I can recall that people had a different impression of Mooney than I ever had. You worked for him, I believe.
Oh, yeah, it's a long time. Yeah.
My boss said to me one time, he said, you don't know Mooney. He said, he's the most unreasonable guy. I said, oh, no, I never got help from Mooney. I don't remember him ever being an unreasonable man.
Oh.
Well, he said, I don't know why. He says, you just never gotten it from him. I said, well, I know why. Mooney was satisfied with what I was doing.
It's true. It's true.
And he should have been.
Yeah.
We had a plant that was second to none.
Right. That's quite true. Good plan. Well, don't get too far ahead now. Come back to the after the layoff.
Well,
had there
let's see, it was in 45. I'm quite sure it was 45.
Okay.
That the plant closed off. And then I came back, and at that particular time, I went to work with Joe French down in the axle plant. Ray Carter was down there as the general foreman.
Now that's back over at Plant 1?
And back at Plant 1.
Okay.
And I was working in the capacity of a foreman at that time.
All right.
And I liked it. And I would like to have stayed with Joe. But at that time, Minnow came back and started up the assembly plant. Now, I didn't know Minnow.
All right.
But I had been working for a guy by the name of Clayton Greenhall. Oh, and I probably shouldn't say it, but in my estimation, I don't know whether he would. I'm quite sure he wasn't really sure whether he was punched or bored.
Okay.
But he did. He wanted to make a name for himself.
Yeah.
And the Shell Plant 1 had quite a few people in there that were kind of known as at that time they called us the Quiz Kids. We ran a good operation. Mm-hmm. And he wanted us in Shell Machining, or from the Shell Machining Group over into assembly.
Okay.
I didn't want to go, but I didn't have any choice. I had to go. And it was his desire, they called him an assistant superintendent, was to take the place of Minnow. It never worked out that way, and it wouldn't have worked out that way because he couldn't have done it.
Okay.
He just disappeared, and I don't even know where he disappeared to.
That's interesting.
But over the course of years, we found those people. They had a way of disappearing.
Okay.
No one ever knew where they did go to. But I did. I came over to the assembly line about the 1st of October. I only worked over there about 2.5, 3 weeks when the first strike of the union occurred.
I think in November.
And the first part of November, and held until April of 46.
Okay.
Before we went back. Now, during that course of time, we were paid. We put in about part of our time. At first, they had us coming in every day. Then it got to the point to where they let you have time off once in a while.
Okay.
I mean, you couldn't work or anything.
But were you coming in the plant?
You just came into the plant, and I
Okay.
tell you, we played poker and everything else.
Yeah, that's your board stuff.
It was a boring sort of a situation. It really was. And there was no benefit whatsoever to our coming in. But they wanted you to cross the lines and come on in. And we did so. Oh, we got to know some of the people a little better. Some of us would go out to dinner. And it was more of a social time than anything else.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. I don't recall anything really beneficial.
Were the guys that were on strike, were they for or against that strike, so to speak?
Well, they must have been for it. The union held a pretty good position onto it. There weren't very many people in the plant at all that were hourly people. We might have had an electrician or two. I don't remember even a half a dozen people.
So it was just really dead.
Really dead. That's right. Yeah.
Did we get any cars made before the strike?
Oh yeah.
We made a few.
We made a few. Not a great many of them.
Did the plant start up okay after the long?
Well, you know, as a plant, the thing, this was back in building 16 and 20.
Okay.
Where the assembly plant was.
All
They
right.
called it an assembly plant. There was a raised conveyor where they put frames on and run it around, the Mickey Mouse affair.
Okay.
And when it got to the end of it, about at the break between building 16 and 20, it came off of the raised conveyor. By that time, you had the wheels on.
Okay.
And the engine set into it. And you had to run it across make a turn, mind you, to come onto an assembly line. And this assembly line was built out of planks. Well, and ran down through building 20, down to the end of the building where it turned and went to a test rolls.
All right.
The car rolled around on its own wheels and was, he brought it up with a chain hooked to the one in front, drew it on the line.
Yeah.
Until it got onto the line, and at that point, there was a single rail went down through the center.
Okay.
And it had dogs onto it, which came up against the transmission or the differential.
Oh, okay.
And pushed the car
Pusher
down the line.
Okay.
But you can imagine the problems you had on this thing if your linkage wasn't set well. Climb over the thing, and next thing you know, the car climbs up and drops down into a pit or something.
Oh my God.
Oh, we had that happen numerous times.
Okay.
The worst thing we had was when I first went there was I was set in charge of the first section of the final. Now, I remember my first day there. Minnow just assumed that I knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
I had never seen an assembly plant in my life.
Okay.
And I don't think I'd been a foreman of the thing. Well, Huey Stanley had been there before the war on the assembly line. And Huey was to break me in. I remember we started about 7 o'clock that morning. And about 7:30, Mike come over and said to him, how's he coming? Huey says, good. That seemed to be the expression for everything. And Mike says, okay, you take over. Huey, he says, you go over and take over on that repair section.
Okay.
And I was on my own.
Half an hour.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I'd been for more than 15 minutes when one of those cars that was bringing over from that drop-off line on its own wheels run over the end of the line and went into the section that wasn't covered.
Okay.
So we had to take and unchain it, get some men and back it up and then bring it back in again to put it on the line.
And shut off all the conveyors while you're doing that.
Yeah. And Minnow was one of those guys that keep that line going, no matter what. So he rushes his butt out there. And I used to say the only thing the man was any good for was he had ability to put a fire in your heart that melted the lead in your rear.
Oh, okay.
I'm telling you, before the morning was over, I was ready to tell him where to put it.
Oh,
I restrained that for almost a week.
for a whole week.
Yeah. But Lord, I said, how long you been operating this thing? He said, hey, listen, that operated that way before the war, and it can operate that way after the war. And I said, if you operated that way before the war, you were stupid. Oh, that went over good too.
Uh-huh.
Well, if I was so smart, what would you do different? Well, I recall what I did different. I had a guy come down, cut a section out of that rail and put a long roller into it on each side.
All right.
So that when the wheels hit the rail, the roller put it back.
Kind of pushed it in. Uh-huh.
We made quite a few improvements of that nature before we got through. and Lord, he had, at that time we ran mostly cars, standard transmission.
All right.
Synchromesh, they call them.
Yeah.
He was training new people when you don't know anything. I had a couple of old timers for which I was eternally grateful and saw to it that both of them got advanced later on when I was able to do so. But if it hadn't been for them, I don't think I could have survived the first day.
Because everybody on the line is kind of green also.
Oh, yes, sure were. And Fisher was having trouble over on the other side getting going, and we used to have what we called wampuses. Now,
a wampus knot.
Yeah, but you'll know you can't even find wampus.
Yeah.
But we called them wampus. And the guy would try to get a bolt started in those suckers, and the threads wouldn't be any good onto them, and you'd end up on the old wrenches that we had. Holy smoke! What were they 1V1s? Yeah,
Air wrench. They're
air wrench. They had a cycling deal. They would go to start a bolt up.
Yeah.
Well, you were lucky if you could put three body bolts in a minute operation.
They were so slow.
Oh, they were so slow. You could bake a cake while they were going.
I'll be darned.
And they dropped the front end down through a hole in the wall from the second floor.
Okay.
And well, we did that for a long time. I tell you, we did that. As a matter of fact, we were still doing that. Yeah, in '79.
How about the body? How'd that get there? That must have gone on right.
I'm trying to think. How we brought that body down. Oh, that was a body drop.
She had a hole in the floor there too?
Had a hole in the floor there too. And that body was brought down about 65, 70 feet after come on the line.
After you made the session?
Yeah. And then now wait a minute. No, back here, that body was put on what was on the High Line.
Back when the chassis was being made up?
Yeah.
Okay. So when it came through the wall?
It come through the wall, though.
It had the body in it?
It was let down to the body at that point. And then we put the front end on.
All right.
About 80 feet up.
All right. Okay.
Now there we had a gal put that down, and she was the slickest thing I ever saw for putting that down. I believe you could have blindfolded her and she could have done it. I used to swear, Sally, let's go the lever, the front end drops. As it comes in, the boys get a hold of it, and it was in. Never got over Marv, how they could put that front end in there. But it was principally due to the fact that that gal was good enough that she was taking the slack off.
Yeah. As they were.
And dropping her in. Well, we put the front ends on at that point. No one got the front end on until we had people that were starting to hook up wiring harnesses, hook up headlights and so on onto it. The front end had the radiator onto it and the fenders attached. Let's talk about the improvement you got today, and I can see that probably 140% of the improvement is engineering. Things fit. In those days, they just didn't fit. Well, good Lord. Hammers, 2x4s. As old Paul George used to say, the bigger the hammer, the better the repairman.
Okay.
Yeah. You get the front end, and you had a 6-foot maple 2x4. You stick that behind the wheel, rear back onto the thing to bring the fender back into position. Took a good man to do that. Put it into position. And they would space it at the top and then try to get it down to the bottom, space it. If it didn't fit, took a wooden block with a leather on the side of it.
And a hammer?
Yeah, well, you got to be pretty knowledgeable.
And
you know how to hit them, or you could get them to fit. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Martin. Yeah, his name was Martin. He was out of Building 40. He spent all of his time over there just trying to tell us ways and means that we might be able to make a fender fit the door and the hood to fit the fender. It was outrageous. I tell you, that's all there was to it. You had to put your hood hinges, hood hinges were on the hood. And they would drop down. The guy would bring in the hood and set it down there and blindside it from the inside. It comes
4646 Clark Road, Bath, Michigan. The recording was made on June 18th, 1990 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing. This is tape number 2 of 3 tapes. Okay, the cowls were...
Well, the cowls were every which way. You couldn't find 2 cowls that were exactly alike. Mind you, these were something that had been holes punched out into them over the fissure, and then just stuck onto the body and welded into position without even using gauges. And now you're going to put down a hood hinge that doesn't have any particular spot that sets. It was an elongated hole, but no fixtures to set them to. Set those up against that cowl, put your bolts into it, and then...
And the guy's doing it so you can't see the hole? He's just doing it blind, kind of?
Put the nut in the nut runner and stick it through the hole and find the wampus in the hood hinge and buckle her up. Now at that point then, you put the hood down and get a look at it. Then you would take a bar about 18-20 inches long, hardened steel bar, a 42-ounce hammer, and bring the hinge into position. Now you'd be amazed at how good people got doing that.
Didn't beat everything all up?
Oh no, it really didn't. After man got used to it, he could really do a pretty good job. And you get it down to where it had a tolerable fit.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you had hood fitters down the line who finished it off. And it was done mostly with a big hunk of leather, which you would use to fold the door to the to the fender and cause the fender to
Kind of
push
spring
out.
it.
Yeah, to get it so it lined up fairly well. And the block along the side of the hood and the front of the hood. Now, most of the hoods came down at that point. They weren't flat out like they are now.
Yeah.
They had a curve onto them. You'd pull those out or bang them in, whatever was required. Oh, it was bad enough even in the 1948 that I can recall when my son Michael was born. We had to have a car at the auto show. And it was 20th of January.
Okay.
I took my wife to the hospital at 6 o'clock in the evening, came back to work. They called me at 20 minutes to 12 that baby was about to be born, so I rushed down to the hospital. He was born, and about a quarter after 1, I was back to work in the plant. We worked until, I think, 7 o'clock the following morning to get that car, the hood fit. We actually had to trim 3/16 of an inch off with nippers and fold it down and file it, refinish the hood in order to get it to fit. That was in 48. But we finally got an acceptable one that they'd take to the auto show. Oh, good Lord. Really, it wasn't until about 1957 that we began to work with engineering. The assembly plant would have some say as to what was needed. Mm-hmm. And we began to work with engineering, and at that time we had what we call the AIM manual. Okay. Maybe you recall it.
Assembly Information Manual.
The Assembly Information Manual. And that is about the time, too, that we begin to get rid of blueprints and get into having the photos deals where we could project them.
Yeah. Prior to that, Ken,
prior to that, we had filing cabinets, hundreds of filing cabinets, yeah, full of blueprints. To find out something, you had to lay it out on the floor. I can recall laying out blueprints that were 10 and 12 feet long. And
to find a dimension or something.
And can you believe that you, as an assembler, you got your first view back in the 40s and early 50s? You got your first view of the automobile when you were ready to build your first one.
You mean it arrived? It just sort of arrived?
That's right.
How did you know what you were doing?
Who said we did? But we got by.
Somehow you did it.
Well, you learn fast. And you always use the assembly plant as the introduction to people within Oldsmobile, you know. I mean, 20% turnover was a very light turnover at the start of production. I've known of times when we had in excess of a third of our people would be absolutely new off the streets. Never had built a car in their lives. We had individuals come in that wouldn't even know how to use a screwdriver properly. They all had to be taught. It wasn't easy.
Well, and that was most like in the 40s when you first started. That was quite prevalent.
Oh, good heavens, yes. Now, there was a lot of people who, by the time that we were building cars in 46, that had come back from service.
Okay.
But now, don't get any idea that because they had built cars prior to going to service, that they were going to come back and be accomplished workmen, because they had a little different idea. By that time, they'd had enough of the Army, and some of them were pretty tough to manage. They weren't going to take any of that stuff from anybody, you know. Be told how to do anything.
Okay. What was our management? How would you characterize the management at that time?
Oh, I was the most discouraged individual the first week that I worked in the assembly plant that you could possibly get. I was ready to quit any day. The foreman at that time and the general foreman thought it was smart to talk out of the side of their mouth. And in the terminology of arseholes and elbows, that's all we want to see moving. They were
Coarse, rather.
coarse, rough, ignorant. That was the best way to say.
Would those be classified as the old bull of the woods types, I guess, maybe?
I can't think of a single one of those individuals that Minnow had at that particular time that in the 1970s I would have given standing in the plant.
How did they get to those positions in those days?
I don't know. They were kind of birds of a feather. I think they just kind of ganged together, that was all.
They were all sort of alike.
They were heavy drinkers. They were coarse. They were profane.
Yeah.
Mike didn't run a good ship at all. He really didn't. And Mike is it for himself. He, as I say, he had an ability. When he walked into a room, the room seemed to be electrified. And I always had that feeling about Mike, and I did to the day he died.
Interesting.
He could, he had some kind of a stimulus about him. He was really a physical type.
Is he a big man, physically?
No, I would say probably Mike might have weighed 190, 200 pounds, maybe. But he wasn't that big. He was very athletic. Now, just to give you an example, I remember a time when a fellow by the name of Tansey, you might have known him, Bob Tansey,
Yeah.
won the city golf tournament.
Yes.
Was bragging about it. And Mike bet him $25 that he could take a 5-iron and a putter and beat him.
Oh.
And he did.
And he did it, huh?
And he did. Now, that's the kind of an individual he was. He didn't know how to lose.
Yeah.
But Mike really didn't. Mike never knew how to build an automobile.
Well, when did all of that start to then change from that approach?
Well, John Dykstra started to change that. Matter of fact, John Dykstra did quite a bit to start to get rid of Mike. In 46. And about that time, he went to Ford's. Remember, he was, let me see, what would they have called him at that time? I think they called him manufacturing manager.
Or works manager.
Works manager.
Maybe something like that.
Yeah. And he went to Ford's.
Okay.
Because that must have been about late 47 or early 48, because it was in 48 that he had his brother, Ted Dykstra, who had been the general superintendent over at the Ford's plant, come and see me and tell me that John said if I wasn't happy to come on down to Ford.
Oh. So
he had picked certain people that he thought had some potential. And I didn't go down to Ford.
And rob a Oldsmobile a little bit.
Yeah. But it was about that time that things began to change a little bit.
Okay.
Now, actually, things didn't really change for the better in the assembly plant until, we moved over into 75. In 1949? Yeah, 1949.
Yeah.
Where we put the motor plant and a few things over in there, but it was really 1950 before we ran the first model.
Okay.
In that plant.
You're still using that old building 16?
Right.
Up to that
And
point.
about that time, Ed Ditto came in on methods.
Okay.
Truxell was a trainee.
Yeah.
Mooney, Dorshimer, a few of those people began to come in, and things began to change a little bit.
Okay.
as I say, it was 1957 when Bill Slackton was made assistant superintendent.
Now, was Minnow still there then?
Yes, Minnow left in 57.
All right.
Later,
Okay.
Bill became assistant superintendent, and about 6 months later became the superintendent. 57.
So Minnow moved over to the new plant when it started in 30.
Yes. Oh yeah, he moved over there, and you didn't see much of him except he'd be in the office, and if the line stopped, wait, he had a way of, he could leap out of that chair and head for wherever the trouble was. A light would show on the board deal. If you were there when Minnow got there, everything was fine, no matter what the problem. But if you weren't there, it was hell to pay. Yeah. I think 75% of the guys were afraid of him.
Mhm.
I never felt that way myself. I always felt I could outsmart him. And I remember one time I was a bit late. He was there, lowering. So I dropped in the pit and I came out of the pit and I said, damn it, Mike. You take care of that problem back down the way there. What's the problem? And I'd give him a fictional problem and away he went. And I sat there grinning.
Got rid of it.
Oh, I mean, you could turn him around like that. But he was a good guy. When Slackton came in, I was a general foreman. I was general foreman in the frame line when Slackton first appeared. I remember he was, at that particular time, he was the methods man to devise methods.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time, the Livonia fire occurred.
Oh, yeah, it was 53.
8?
53, I think was Livonia
Oh,
fire.
were we back there 53?
Yeah, because it was just as I was getting
53
ready
or
to come
50,
to work.
54 model.
Yeah.
Okay, 54 model.
Right.
Because we had to take and go from the hydromatic transmission to using the Buick's
Dynaflow. Right.
And we were set with an entire frame yard packed to the gills and umpteen thousands of frames built en route that had too small a opening in the center.
Oh, okay.
And Slackton's first job was to get a machine that would poke that hole. And he thought he had just the cookie. Downey was the works manager at that time,
Okay.
and
GC Downey.
Burnham.
Yeah. Okay.
Burnham was his assistant.
Yeah.
They were out in the yard, and I was a general foreman on the frames. And Bill got this ram. They greased it all up, and they set it onto that frame, and looked beautiful.
Yeah.
Rammed itself up, and come boom to a stop. And I have enough power to do that thing.
Push it through, huh?
He sat there and banging this thing, and they were wringing their hands. And Lord, we had to get these cars moving. We're gonna shut down everything. We're gonna shut down Dynaflow and everywhere else if we couldn't take these units. That was the first time that Ricks's farmer crates helped him. I remember I grabbed a piece of pipe up out of the yard, about a foot long, stuck it over a 6-foot crowbar, put it into the frame, and opened up.
Oh, I wound it out.
Yeah, well, I was a powerful young pup, as you remember, when I was young. Well, we couldn't get anybody else that could do it. Well, I said, hell, I'm not going to stand out here as general foreman and do this job. So I got a guy with a torch and had him just run the torch down, get her head up a little bit, and then you could do it easy. And that was our tool.
Oh my God.
For a while until we got the outfits made that would do it.
A bar with a roller on.
Yeah, that's the first day I remember knowing Slackton.
Uh-huh.
He took me to lunch.
Oh, did he? I
Bought me a
imagine.
steak.
Yeah. Oh, he was embarrassed.
Yeah. Well, Bill came over first as a general foreman. from methods.
Okay.
At that particular time, he and Mooney were kind of in a race for who's gonna get somewhere.
Okay.
And Bill was one of those guys that set himself a year or two to do this or that, and if he didn't, he wanted to move.
Yeah.
So he came over, and as I say, it was early *57. He became the assistant superintendent, and I always admired Bill. He had a lot of ability. He had a lot of faults too. You knew him, and they hadn't changed. Even today, Bill's living in California now. But when he was in Florida, I would see him, and he still got them.
Don't change.
They don't change. But at the same time, he was the greatest thing that ever occurred to Assembly. Because Bill wasn't a guy that sat in the office. He was out to see what the problems were and working on the problems himself.
Okay.
And knowing what they were. And we got, let's see, Harold Dolph.
Product engineering.
Over in product engineering. That to agree with us that we ought to have some input into the new product. And in '57, I spent 25% of my time over in engineering with Harold Dolph. God, I can't think of the other guy's name. The fellow who was really more responsible for the A manual than anybody else. Never got much credit for it. And we began to get the thing in pictorial form.
Okay.
Well, it made it 100 times easier to learn.
Than these great huge blueprints.
And from there, we set up sessions going over into the assembly portion and working with them in assembly, assembling new models.
This is in product.
Engineering. For the year ahead.
Yeah.
And suggesting changes that ought to be made or otherwise that would make it difficult to assemble.
Yeah.
And progressively, they became better. That's all there was to it. So we got down to where it was a pretty refined deal.
So that was kind of the start of this process of working in product.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, when Bill became superintendent, he wanted to make me assistant superintendent, and Jack Wolfram wouldn't hear of it. He had just taken over from Skinner in '55, I believe it was.
51, maybe.
What?
51, maybe.
Oh, I think it was later than that,
Anyway,
wasn't it?
Whenever. That's
Well,
okay.
anyway, he was a very difficult man in the respect that he seemed to think he really didn't know the difference between education and formal learning. No.
He was concerned that you didn't have a college degree.
Oh, he was very concerned over the fact that I was not a college graduate. And he didn't want a man in there that wasn't a college graduate.
Interesting.
So I became general foreman at large.
Oh.
Now, there's no such a deal.
Okay.
Rollis was our works manager at that time. He made it up for me in the bonuses.
Oh.
And I had no complaints.
Yeah.
Except I didn't get an automobile.
No.
I didn't get the automobile until 1959. Well, in 1959, they were going to start the F-85. And they didn't have anybody start the F-85.
Oh, no.
So I got elected, and I got placed as an assistant superintendent.
Right.
And shortly after that, they made McGinn assistant superintendent in the other plant. Now, McGinn did not have a college education, but they always thought he had. He had been in service, and he had an associate degree.
Oh.
And I don't think he ever got beyond the associate.
Yeah.
No, I'm stating that. That's my.
That's okay. I understand.
But he suited Jack Wolfram on that point. And I started the F-85 on nights.
Was there somebody on days, or is that when the?
Oh, no. No, we had to run nights because we couldn't ship cars, and we had to use the paint facilities that they used during the day. And before we operated very long, we were taking up the slack of the repair that they used to, they used to work around the clock for about 4 months. And begin to take up the slack and do part of the repair work along with building the F-85.
Oh,
Because the F-85 was a good operation. I mean, we had, I remember Bob Roller from Buick coming down, stood on the end of the line, raising hell with 2 superintendents that he brought down with him. Because one time he said there were 26 cars that went onto that repair line that didn't have a repair on. Well, that's right. We were building by that time. We were building that way. That was a good operation.
Yeah.
And we operated there until 1963 when we had to join the thing with the main over with the BC car.
Now, the F-85 was made
The F-85 was made in building 16 and 20.
back again in the old assembly
The
plant.
old assembly plant, but it was a different sort of a deal. This was an integral body
Okay,
that came over from Fisher Body.
yeah,
When we put it off of the trucks in the upstairs, from there on, it was all the way down. The motor and the front assemblies were built on a pilot line running around, and we raised them up with a jack
okay,
to the body
yeah,
and secured them with 3 bolts.
oh, all right,
Before part of it was overhead, part of it was down where you could work on it.
okay.
When we got her down to the end of the building 20, thing was done. Put her on the test rolls. That was about it. From there, I went to paint to be finished.
And you ran that all the second shift?
That was all run on the second shift until 1963.
All right. Do you remember, Ken, how many cars an hour we were making?
Oh yeah, I was supposed to run 50 cars an hour in the end of the first year, and I was running 67.
Okay.
I get up to 78 cars per hour on that old line.
Okay. That's the F-85. How about the big car plant? What was it? Back when you were
Oh, good Lord. In 1955, I recall, the most we ever run was 104 cars an hour.
104.
104. We dropped those on a single steel. We had a 1 cable coming down, 4 hooks attached to it, the body,
The body
pick it up
drop
and drop them down. The body drop was
the bottom.
about, that was about the limit of what you could do, 104 an hour.
And we always ran that plant one shift
1 shift.
in those days.
Well, we ran 2 shifts. What am I talking about? We ran 2 shifts. But we had gotten down in 1960, when we started the F-85. It was on a 1 shift basis.
Okay. But back in the 50s, we would have run 2 shifts.
We ran 2 shifts in the 50s.
All right.
Yeah. Part of the time.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and
That's okay.
think of them to that, but as I say, the body drop was the big bottleneck. Now I'm trying to think. I believe it was 1956 or 57 that Hal Foose came in. Remember him?
Okay, Method's guy.
Or they put him to the job of getting a new body drop.
Okay.
Hal, I love Hal. I do. I like Hal real well. But he was one of the most arrogant, overbearing young pups I ever saw. You couldn't tell him anything, or you couldn't even ask him a question. He was busy, but he devised this deal where had 4 fittings to pick up the body. Everything worked just fine onto it until he started to bring it out over the hole.
Uh-oh.
And I said to him, Hal, that ain't gonna work. Hey, he said, well, what any advice? He said, I'll ask you.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Now I was a general foreman.
Yeah.
I didn't think general foreman was so hot, but nevertheless, I did think the guy ought to listen to me. He didn't. So Mike told me to give him a trial. Oh, Hal takes the old baby out over the hole and he drops her down. And as she went down, she began to do this.
Swing side to side.
No,
And then-
back and forth,
Oh.
back and forth.
Okay.
By the time it got down to the bottom, it knocked the people all over. Hell, they couldn't hold that body.
Yeah.
So Hal back to the drawing boards. And this goes on for about 10 days.
I mean, he change it and come
I
back.
haven't said a damn word to him. He didn't ask my advice.
Yeah.
And at the end of 10 days, Minnow says, get it and keep it out of here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I said, wait a minute. Ain't that bad. I said, Hal's got it there, all right, but he just hasn't got the finishing touches to it. All right, he said, if you want to go along with him 2 more days,
Uh-oh.
2 more trials. So I said to Hal, you got enough? Hal said, Hal, I'm going to do to stop that. I said, go back to basics, buddy. I said, as long as you got a square and you're letting down on cables, you are going to swing. When you put outriggers on the end, you won't swing.
Triangle.
That's simple. He put 4-foot outriggers onto it.
Okay.
Down she goes and does a beautiful job.
Yeah.
I can just say that earlier.
Uh-huh.
You remember, Hal? When you want advice, you'll ask for it?
What'd you say to that?
He became one of the nicest guys after that we ever worked with. Really did. Hal's a good man. He don't trouble was he's like so many people when they're going to do something, they always go back to what they did before.
Right.
You don't look ahead to get something new. You're either blessed with that or you are. I had to use common sense because I didn't have an education.
It's funny. Common sense wins out most of the time.
I don't know how many times Mooney said that. He embarrassed me many, many times in the operating meeting by saying, God, you guys got too much education. The only person in here who hasn't got one uses common sense.
That's right.
And
Not your
he'd come in my office, he'd say, Kenny, you can't substitute common sense and good judgment for education. Well, anyhow, over the years, the thing got better and better and better. That's all there was to it. And we really got so we could work with engineering, come up with a pretty decent car to start with.
Uh-huh.
And run along until, let's see, 19. Something in this room makes my eyes water. I don't know what it is. I have a little allergy that
Probably that wall stuff.
might be.
So
Because it isn't sentiment, because I don't have sentiment. But in 63, Arnold Hanson died.
Okay.
He was the general superintendent. And they made Slack to the general superintendent. Well, it was assumed at that time that I would take his place, but there again, Wolfram stepped in.
Wolfram was still there.
Oh, yeah. Mahoney was really quite outraged with him, and it's a wonder Bill didn't get fired for his standing up for me and Rollis. But Wolfram had his say.
Wolfram prevailed again.
Yeah, and the man with the education. And Jack always said he had intended that he would have been working for me. Instead of that, I was to be working for him. But I never felt I worked for Jack. I never did. In all the years I worked along with Jack, he never made me feel I was working for him.
Right.
He had it, I probably would have quit. But as it was, we got along just splendidly. Jack is one of my best friends.
So he then became the superintendent.
He became the superintendent.
Okay.
They were going to start the tornado.
Yeah, for 66, but 65.
1965, early in 65, and John Belts was chief engineer. John Belts, I remember he came over in the yard and he asked me, he said, when you going to start that tornado for us? And I said, well, I'm not. Because Slackton told me I couldn't. I was needed in the main plant. John said, heck, you're not. And he left, and about half an hour later, I called up to Slackton's office, and he said, the hell you been talking to? I said, what are you talking about? He said, I just got orders from Metzel to put you over in charge of the tornado. And I didn't want anybody else. Tracy was an assistant superintendent at that time. And Bill told him he'd put Tracy there, and Belt says you will like hell. He said, you don't know whether he's punched or bored. Boy, Belts was an outspoken guy.
Oh, yeah, he sure was. Yeah.
Well, Doug wasn't that bad, but Doug was young.
Yeah.
And I helped bring Doug up from a pup, and I know he was a good man. And he just he was a little impulsive. So I started the tornado in the building, let's see, in the bottom of B20.
Mm-hmm.
It was an area that the maintenance people had for the store parts, and we took it out of there. So we ended up with a place that was about maybe 80 feet long and 40 feet wide.
Okay.
And they put some rails up for us, and we got a hold of some frames. We got a body from Euclid. We devised a way of putting the thing together and just run through it to find an assembly sequence.
Okay.
We worked along with the methods people. I've forgotten who the methods man was at that time to come down there. And we finally got the thing so that I built 38 cars down. And they took them down to the proving grounds, run them on the test tracks. Gee whiz, it was when I built the 13th one, I was going to go on vacation. And John Belts used to be a very frequent visitor. And I told him I was going to, instead of taking 3 weeks, I was just going to take a week. But boy, I needed it. And he said, hey, take a tornado with you. I said, oh my God, John, I couldn't take a tornado with me. Why? He said, those things must be worth $100,000. Oh, he said, maybe 6 or 7. But he said, that don't make any difference. Well, I said, I wouldn't feel comfortable with it. Yeah, he said, take it anyway. I said, no, I won't do that. Thanks, but no thanks. Well, that day I got a call from Metzel. And he said, John tells me you don't want to take the tornado because you think it costs too much. He said, take it as a favor for us. He said, let us know how she functions. So I took the 13th tornado and I drove down to the Smokies. God, what a car. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, the 1966 automobile was the best automobile ever built. Mm-hmm. It was overbuilt, really, if anything. I remember being up on the top of the highest mountain down there. Some guy came up and asked me what it was. And I told him, and he said he had been a plant manager at Buick. Been retired about 12, 15 years. Like to look at the engine and stuff. So we were looking at the engine, and I'm explaining to him what we've got there, and straightened up, and Mike, there must have been 50 people there. Oh, about there. My wife said, you should have had a sales blank with you. You could have sold a lot of them. Later on, I was going to go out to Outer Banks. Well, there's a ferry service at the western end of it, and you're near Beaufort, North Carolina. I went out, looked at the ferry deal, and it wasn't going to go for 2.5 hours, so I went back to Beaufort. And we had lunch with a guy who was a Chamber of Commerce head, looked their town over, and it ended up by my getting little close quarters to get to the ferry. So I took off with that thing, and gee whiz, it performed so beautifully, you know. And I am going down the road, and it's a curvy road with swamps on either side. Yeah. I said to my wife, "Holy smoke, look at that guy in back of us. He must be drunk." She said, "Why?" She says, "He can't stay on the road." Oh, really? And I got down to the ferry. I sped up a little bit to get out of his way. Yeah. I wasn't about to have that guy pass me. I got down to the ferry, and I told him there was another guy coming because they were pretty ready to cast off. And he'd come on, and he had a new Cadillac. The first thing he does is leap out of that car, and he comes over and he says, "You're the guy driving that thing?" And I said, "Yes." "What in hell is it?" "That's Oldsmobile's new Tornado." "By God," he said, "when I get back," he says, "if they haven't got one of them for to sell me, you're going to lose some business." He said, "I watched that thing." He says, "You never left that center line." He said, "and I couldn't hold this thing on the road." He said, "I had to slow down." And he is so loudmouth that everybody and his brother around there, and again, we're having a show and tell. That was a neat car, I'll tell you. I had a wonderful time on that one. Because I didn't mind at all telling people about it. We had a name for it. We called it the Mafia. The Mafia? It was all hood. I see. I do. I think, though, that was one of the most beautiful automobiles. You'd stand in a pit, look at the back of it, and that dolphin-like deal on it. That was everything a man had ever wanted in a car. You see, now in 1967, they started to lessen up on it because some people protested it was a little hard riding. But that's what John Belch was after was a sports car. But it wasn't selling as a sports car. It was selling to people in the range of 50 to 70 years for the most part. Yeah. And of course, it being a two-door car and that huge door, which was really a little bit difficult to close unless you were a strong person. And not too much room in the back seat. Lessened its popularity somewhat. But at that, you see, in 1965, on the 66 model, we got that car up to about 58 an hour. And we were popping out. Mm-hmm. Then in 1967, I had more capacity. I was able to run about 75 cars an hour down it. They added some stuff for you? No, Cadillac was coming in. Oh, okay. All right. So could I build a Cadillac chassis? They were using their own engine at first, and then they went to using our engine. Okay. And we built a Cadillac chassis, which was almost identical to the Oldsmobile chassis on a Tornado. Mm-hmm. And we got to the point to where they had to start their own line because I couldn't keep up with their sales. Well, we couldn't. Not a capacity. Tornado was selling at a base price of about $8,500 at that time. Okay. Cadillac was selling at $13,500. And in 1968, they outsold us. Amazing. On the identical chassis. Isn't that terrific? Yeah. And the body was the same body, but with a little better upholstery. I could never see that the Eldorado was the car that the Tornado was. But the Cadillac name had a lot of force. Yeah, if we'd have called that Oldsmobile instead of Tornado, we might have been a little better. Might have been. It's possible. Never know. Well, I operated the Tornado plant until 1960, late 1968, early 1969,
Okay.
when Slackton went to England. And McGinn took his job over,
Okay, as general superintendent.
and I got the job that I always wanted, was assembly.
Okay. And Wolfram was gone.
And I kept it there till I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you retire? Yeah.
79, May of 79.
Okay.
Now we held pretty much first place in corporation for most of those years. But we built our force in assembly. Most of our foremen were brought up from the line. Men that had been top men on the line, that became foremen on the line. And most of our general foremen had been foremen, working under general foreman, so on. I always maintained that part of our good power that we had was the fact that a man had an opportunity to work with a guy, see his failings, see his good points. If he had any brains, he would adopt his good points and figure out as many of the bad points as he could possibly eliminate from his own repertoire. And you're bound to have a better management team. But I don't know what happened. To this day, I still don't know what happened. I had an excellent assistant. I had two excellent assistants. One of them died, as you know. Mike Chuck died. But Jerry Bowman was one of the most natural leaders I ever knew. Jerry's one of those fellows that you don't have to point the way to him. You don't have to tell him how. You just tell him what you want. It would come. He could get utmost loyalty from his people. He could avoid troubles with unions and not give away a thing. But he had one little failing, and that was that when he went to a party or something, he would sometimes get a little boisterous. And on a couple of occasions, he had been observed. Another factor, I tried to talk to him 2 years before to take some night school or something. Show them that you're going to try to improve your education to some extent. We sent him to Flint on every occasion that we could get, and he did very well. But when I was going to retire, but to begin with, Mooney came down and said he talked with Cook that morning. Cook wanted to know whether I was really going to retire or whether I was just stating so. Because McGinn got an idea back in when I was 60 years of age that I was going to retire. I never told him that. They got an idea I was. And I wasn't ready to retire. I was having too much fun. But by the time I was 62 and a half, I was getting too tired. So I better get out while I got time for fun.
Oh, right.
Well, I told him I was going to retire because Cook had said to him, he said, if Ken's going to stay, have him pick out a couple of assistants to get that new plant operate. I said, let the new superintendent pick out his own assistants. And said, no, they were going to do that. They were going to bring Spitzley back from the motor plant if I was going to retire. And I could take my choice of whichever plant I wanted to operate until I retired. I said, I want the plant I got. The old one, I'll stay with it. I had the new one operating at that time, you know. And Mike took it over. And Mike did a nice job. Mike's a good man. Mike right now is a manager in Wisconsin.
Is that the Janesville plant?
Janesville plant, yeah. Rollis's old home ground.
Yeah, right.
I think Kansas City folded, didn't it?
I can't answer. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they shut it down.
Well, anyway, I stayed with the old plant and I tried to talk Mooney into supporting Jerry Bowman, although he said he'd seen some evidence of the fact that Jerry really had the ability,
Yeah.
especially when we had a snowstorm that shut out
Mm-hmm.
the whole of Oldsmobile practically. And Jerry was the only one that could get into the plant in the upper supervision. And that morning, Mooney thought they'd just have to sit for 4 hours. Before an hour was out, Jerry was producing cars and producing good cars. And by the end of 4 hours, when they could send the people home appreciably, he was up to over half the production.
Amazing.
With less than half of a workforce.
Yeah.
He shut down the sheet metal and got their people
borrowed
and did a good job. Good job on it. And Mooney was very impressed with it. But he said, I think I got too strong opposition. Well, I don't know what the opposition ever was. He wouldn't tell me. And they brought this guy in from Kansas City. I don't remember his name.
That Cowger.
Cowger, that's the guy. Yeah.
Gary Cowger.
He was a back patter, glad hander.
Mm-hmm. He was your replacement, Ken?
Yeah. We had that pride system going and working beautifully. Now that was an evolutionary process, not
what was that?
That was personal defect elimination deal. And I had that down to the point to where Tompkins was talking to me about eliminating inspection.
Interesting.
Get away from inspection, and we could have done it. But inside of 6 months, I don't know, the union, of course, didn't want to see inspectors eliminated.
Yeah, probably not.
And Cowdy began to let it slip. It slipped. Well, in the meantime, Slachta had copied the darn thing and tried to work it in a couple of factories here. And I told Bill it wouldn't work. I said, Bill, well, it works just beautifully for Oldsmobile. You want to remember, we started this process back in 1958 when I was general foreman at large. And we worked it up, developed it over the years to where the point to where it was accepted all the way through by the people and by the union. If you stick that into a plant that hasn't had the thing, there's going to be some rebelling. It's a revolutionary process to them. And it has to be done evolutionary. So it didn't work. It fell by the way.
Yeah. Ken, how did that, can you kind of describe how you made that all happen? Because that is kind of a unique happening at Oldsmobile.
Well, we had a system. When a car processed, the man was given his operations to what he could do. Now, if there was any reason whatsoever that he couldn't finish that operation or couldn't complete it, we didn't hold it against him at all if he indicated it.
Okay.
Now, we gave him various ways of indicating it. Some of them would put a mark on the windshield, at a certain mark on the windshield area. Others might hang a tag, which were prepared ahead of time on the operation, and just put a mark that there was a fault there. Some places we marked the card where the card was available, but people had to indicate that there was something wrong with the car, or else it was assumed that the car was correct.
Oh, all right.
Now, if we found something wrong that guy didn't do, we were tough on him.
Okay. But as long as he marked the little,
as long as he marked it, no,
nobody chewed him out.
We had people that took the easy way, but it didn't take you long because the foreman was obligated. When he got up, the repair people kept tab of what they were getting.
Okay.
Kept a tally.
Yeah.
The foreman frequently checked the repair people. What's coming? Well, we got a job down here, job number 4, that is constantly coming in here. We'll get down to 4 and find out what the problem is. back to the source.
Mm.
The whole idea is contain your repair within a block. But when it goes into the next one, unless it is radically wrong, we might let that go with but still your inspectors are alerted.
Yeah.
Your repair people are alerted. It's what it is. And consequently, the repairs cut down on the repair lines from 12, 15 repairs to the line, and down to the point where if you got 3 or 4 on the card, it was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Repair was cut off with people. I don't remember any year, from about 74 on, to where we ran more than a few weeks with trouble in the repair area. And by that time, it would clear right up.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, I can recall back in the 50s when we would operate from maybe September when we started the model until the following September.
With the repair system
with the
going?
repair system going around the clock. Yeah. We used to feel lucky if we could get rid of the repair by May or June.
Interesting.
We used to couldn't find enough room in the yard to put all the cripples.
So the combination of the engineering approach and the PRIDE program and perhaps management.
Oh yeah,
allowed us to
management
get
changed too.
through this.
And we always had excellent relations with the union.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, I recall one time being called over to Cutler's office where they wanted me to tell them how we kept getting grievances, 79 grievances, speed ups.
Mm-hmm.
It seems Buick was swamped with over 130, was about to shut them down.
Mm.
Pontiac was swamped, was about to shut them down. Oldsmobile hadn't had one in 4 years.
Interesting. What do you attribute that to? What did you tell him?
Yeah, of course we had them.
What did you tell him that day?
Well, the union was cooperating.
Mm-hmm.
When the foreman couldn't resolve something with their people, they came and I had an agreement with them that the top committeeman, the area committeeman, and myself would go out to observe the jobs. And we would resolve it at that point, or a result would go to a grievance, but it would never be a grievance until we resolved it.
So you at least got your shot at it.
Well, Art Baker, who's now your top push, was a top committeeman at that time. One day he pointed out the fact, he said, I don't know whether this is so good or not, Ken. He said, I've got down here in my deal that we have looked at over 20 grievances of this nature. There were people who were aggrieved, but without writing the grievance. And in every instance, we hadn't given up anything. And in a number of those instances, we took people out of the group and added more work. But I also pointed out to them, which was a training ground for them, don't listen to a guy who's saying I got too much to do without going out and looking at it.
Right.
What you will invariably find out is the guy is doing the work and he is not really busy, because if you've got a balanced operation, you can do it easily. What you will find is within sight of that individual, you've got one or more people who are not doing enough. And this guy's saying, hey,
Yeah.
we're both getting the same money.
And I'm working.
Why have I got to work hard while this guy's loafing? Why can't they balance this thing? When we would balance it, sometimes it took people out. It took people who took work from one group, put it into another.
Sure.
Maybe sometimes it was just a matter of changing the position for which this man was reaching for his stock or something, and he was giving him a few seconds here or there. Because over the years, it's my belief then, and it's my belief yet, that a man who has enough to do without running is a better operator than a man who only has half a job. Because when you're running a line and you're running at a certain speed going down the line, this man knows how far he can travel and so on. If he's only doing half a job, he's going to try to force that into 3/4 of a job. And he's going to begin to neglect work. Where when he runs that as a pattern and he just nicely gets back to get another, it runs smooth. And I don't know whether you've ever noticed it or not, but there's a tempo to any assembly line.
Yeah.
And if you can't pick up that tempo, there's something wrong with it. He never could find the tempo of Buick. I never could. Now, Bob Rollert offered to take me over in the 60s, early 60s, to Buick to be the superintendent. I wouldn't do it. I said, no, I'm a farmer. I own a farm and I like it.
And the working relationships were different in Buick, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But
Wonder why that was, Ken. Why were the working relationships here in Lansing so much different?
well, partly I think due to the fact that when you got your supervisors in the plant had come up working with the people, they knew what a job was like. Heaven's sakes, I could remember as a foreman often, a man was having trouble in the pit. We would go down and send him on relief and do his job for 20 minutes. Now, what's his problems? And you try to work those problems out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was the man.
Yeah.
Usually it was the job. And people appreciated that.
Mm.
And they appreciated the fact they could come and talk to you. No. I never let a man come into my office and talk about his boss, other than him telling me that he's got troubles with it. And basically ask him, what are those troubles? And then tell him, now, look, I want to talk more about it. I don't want to talk more about it now. I want to get your boss in here, and the three of us will converse. Well, needless to say, I think 50% of the problems washed out right there. A guy wanted to tell me something, but he didn't want to tell me to his boss. If he didn't want to talk to his boss, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. There were times when the supervisor was wrong. I didn't tell him so in front of the man, but when we got through, I would say to him, hey, Joe, look, in my opinion, you're on real thin ice. You're about ready to pop through. And you're wrong. So I'm going to give you 3 days to straighten out your problem. At the end of 3 days, if that problem isn't resolved, I'm going to tell you what to do. Hey, I don't ever remember telling anybody what to do. They could do it.
Sure.
But
See, Kenny, did you know like Skinner or
yeah,
at all?
yeah, Sheriff Skinner.
Managers at all? That you-
I didn't know them intimately or
No,
anything of that
but maybe
nature.
you
I remember
describe-
I remember my first occasion that I ever met Skinner.
Sure.
I was setting up those Excelos
Mhm.
in March of 1941.
Oh, it's Horsemark.
And at that particular time, that plant was started under a cost plus basis. You, whatever it cost, General Motors got a profit
Mhm.
above it. Well, that I think essentially is a lousy way to do a business because that encourages people to be wasteful. On that occasion, I had walked up to the crib and I ordered 9 pairs of gloves. I had a standing at the crib, even though I was only a setup man, whereby the crib attendant would give me what I asked for, and my foreman stood for it on the honor system. And there was a guy there in a gray suit. He said, how many pairs of gloves are you getting there? And I said, 9 pairs of gloves.
3646 Clark Road, Bath, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on June 18th, 1990. This is tape number 3 of 3 tapes. Skinner and 9 pairs of gloves.
Well, I simply told him I needed the 9 pair of gloves or I wouldn't have ordered 9 pairs of gloves. I remember him saying something about, why don't you turn in gloves which they could wash and perhaps use over? And I told him, listen, mister, when they get through with the gloves on my operation, there's only one place for them, and that's the trash can. Because they're not fit to wear.
They're worn out.
They're worn out. He thanked me. And the next time I come to the crib, the guy said to me, that was? And I said, no, I don't know who he was. He just asked me a question and I answered him. He said, that's the big boss over at Olds. That's Sherrod Skinner. He said, he wanted to know who you were. What authority you had to get gloves. And I know that he made mention of it to my superintendent, Emil Rohrbeck at that time. He said, hey, you got a guy down there, he says, you ought to observe. He said, I think he's got the right idea.
Okay, so it worked out.
So it worked out. The only other time that I can ever recall having any conversation with Mr. Skinner was they used to hold these, they called them executive club dinners in those days. They made you feel like you were an executive to the effect that anybody who was on salary, I don't remember at that time, I don't think at that time it included the salary clerks. They were brought in on a later date.
All right.
But the supervisors used to meet once a month for a dinner.
Oh, that frequently.
And the general manager would talk to them, and you had an informal type of dinner, but it was good. I mean, good dinner. And at that particular one, they had a show after the dinner. And I'm to sit right behind Mr. Skinner. And he had Jack Wolfram. And he introduced Jack. And by the way, I remember that he called him Jack. Which, as you know, Mr. Wolfram never allowed anyone to do.
Jack.
No, with him is either Mr. Wolfram or boss.
Really?
Yeah. He was a little different, wasn't he? He was a little different. But Skinner held quite a conversation with 2 or 3 of us. I believe I was in company with, Burnham, Slachta. Slachta was a methods engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And, I forget who else. It was 4 of us.
Was Skinner the kind of guy that would just arrive in a plant?
Skinner was the kind of a guy that could arrive at the plant, drop into the plant, and talk. Well, now then, Cook was that kind of a guy too.
Okay.
I mean, I never was in Bob Cook's office with Bob Cook as general manager at all. But Cook would drop into my office several times in a month, sometimes several times in a week.
Mm-hmm.
Sit there, and he used to profess he liked my wife's coffee, which I always took a quart of coffee in there.
Okay.
We'd sit there. And Cook even had when he had Rollis's job, which was a manufacturing manager, he had a phone installed on the end of the table and back of the desk, which he would sit there sometimes for an hour in the morning calling other superintendents throughout the plant and talking to them. And he had a habit of doing that even when he became general manager, coming down once in a while using that phone.
Now, those people in between, the Wolframs and the Beltzes and,
Belts was a wonderful guy, I tell you. John Belts was down in the plant. Very, as far as that goes, often seen Metzel
really?
down in the plant. Usually when he came down in the plant, he was accompanied either by Jim Lewis or Belts. And they would come down to see how things were functioning and find out whether we got any problem that
He really would do that.
really that engineering could help on to.
That's neat.
Oh yeah, they're that kind of people. You didn't have an intimate relation, but after all, I guess that was a place where the money was made.
Yeah. How about Howard Carroll?
Oh, Howard Carroll would drop in, always drop in when a model started, 3 or 4 times, but then you would never see him again.
Okay.
Yeah. But his always was just curiosity without too much discussion. But nice guy.
Wolfram, was he ever? Never.
Wolfram never, ever appeared in that. The only time that I ever had any association with Mr. Wolfram in the plant was, I was operating the F-85. And one afternoon, after we'd started, it was around 5 o'clock because we would start the plant at 4. I got a notice that Mr. Wolfram was going to come down to the plant with Mr. Skinner.
Okay.
Mr. Skinner wanted to see the plant.
So this was long after Skinner had left.
Yeah. And he came down. And I met him at the door. He started to introduce me to Mr. Skinner, and Mr. Skinner said, I am well acquainted with Ken. They had brought down he had sent some of the people down from the building 40 with a program where he wanted them to be shown.
Oh, yeah.
And Skinner said, you got somebody here, he said, that could show this group your tour? And I called Tracy over. He said, Jack, he said, why don't you and these boys go? He said, I want to take Ken here and get off the beaten path. We went down through the plant and he talked to people. He must have talked to 20 people.
I'll be John. Isn't that interesting?
And that's the only time I ever saw Skinner, or Wolfram rather, in the plant. Cook came down one time and he brought, what was his name? Lorenzo? Tony Lorenzo?
Yeah.
DeLorean.
Oh, DeLorean.
DeLorean. It was most impossible man I've ever seen in my life. He's tall. He's got long legs.
Yeah.
He wanted to have me show him the plant.
Okay.
This is a Tornado. So we're heading down that plant. And hell, I would have had to dog trot to keep up with them. And I said, hey, did you want to see the plant or do you want to take a running match? Because I said, I can't keep up with you and you're not seeing anything. And the guy smiled and he said, okay. He said, let's get down to your base. And he started asking questions. Boy, I thought Cook was going to have apoplectic. But we got through and DeLorean says, he shook hands and he said, thanks. He said, I probably got more out of that tour than I ever got out of any tour. I said, well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Because he slowed down.
Cook said afterwards, what the hell did you say to him? And I said, I told him to slow down. I wasn't going to run. I'm not a dog trotter. said, I wouldn't have said that to him. I said, well, I did.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, those are the interesting occurrences.
Oh, they were. One other factor that got me, I had observed back in the year that John Belts passed away, a couple of times that Belts had been in the plant. And I wondered what he was doing. Each time he'd just come in and he would turn around and go back. He had somebody with him. And just a couple of weeks before he quit working, died, I got a call to come up to his office if I would. And I went up there. And I went in and he was sitting behind that desk and he was, just saffron yellow.
And
Looking terrible. And he said, I called you up here. He said, I apologize. He said, I've tried to get down to the plant to see it. He said, 3 or 4 times. And he said, I just couldn't make it. He said, my only purpose in asking you to come up here, he said, is to tell you how much I appreciate your work.
amazing.
And that gets a guy, I tell you right where it hurts. I would have read that than a $5,000 a month raise. But that's the kind of a man he was too. He was a real individual. We had a problem on one of the tornadoes one time. We were down to Warren, Michigan.
Touch on it.
And John was going to hold a meeting. Well, the first thing we did was had a showing of cars out there in the block. And there was a chap named Jones that was head of the body design.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Dapper dresser.
George Jones.
George Jones.
George.
Now, I don't know George Jones all that way, and maybe I misjudged him, but I don't think so, really.
George is dead.
Is he?
Passed away a year ago.
I hope he went to a fitting reward.
I'm sure he did.
But we had a real problem. Where the door came up, there was a rubber unit that was supposed to keep the weather out. And this thing was never in the position where it should be on the bodies. Everything I'd seen in the pilots. And there on the show floor, it was out of position. And I said to him, to Jones, this thing here is a problem. It's never in position where it should be. And there's no possible way to put it in the position so that it will stay there. And he turned to me, he said, are you an engineer? And I said, well, no, I'm not an engineer. I said, you know that I'm not an engineer. Well, he said, when you get to be an engineer, he said, talk to me about engineering problems. Well, I didn't have anything more to do with it. Belts came up. Belts was chief engineer at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Belts says, you see any problems, Ken? And I said, yeah, they did. I said, this particular problem right here, there's nothing we can do with it in the plant. It's a problem there and it's a problem here. He looked at it, he said, good God, it certainly is, isn't it? He said, have you talked to anybody about it? I said, just Jones. Oh. He said, well, what did he say about it? So I told him precisely what he said. He slapped me on the back. He said, don't let it get you, kid. He said, we'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here's old John. He's sitting at a table. He sits like this,
Yeah,
holding the meeting.
slide out of a chair.
He's holding the meeting. All at once he said, I saw a problem up there on the floor. And he said, don't think it's taken care of. He said, I don't like particularly, he said, the attitude of the individual that it was brought up to. And then he hauled off and he whopped the desk, and I'm telling you, the glass split across in 8 directions.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he says, God, he said, you guys want something up. He says, you do it at home. He said, if production comes to you with a problem, And he said, if it needs an engineering change of any nature, unless that thing is so prohibitive in cost that you got to do something differently. He said, I want it fixed and I want it fixed on the spot. And he said, if don't, he says, you're going to answer to me. And he says, all your fancy clothes, all your beautiful looks won't keep you in the position you're in. Oh, he laid that law down to him. He never mentioned.
He didn't mention who it was.
He never mentioned to him.
He was talking to a group.
To a group. But hey, I never had another problem ever in the next 4 or 5 years. Because Dorschmer told me, he said, hey, if ever we have a problem, give me a buzz.
And Dorschmer was that way.
I called him just once. Just once. We had an engineer. I'm not going to tell you who the guy was. But he had a problem. He would come down and snoop around. He was what we called a snooper. Now he had a big position in product engineering. And on one occasion, he noted that we were not setting a clutch adjustment properly on a synchro mesh car. And at that particular time, we were running quite a few synchro meshes.
Okay.
He never said a word to me. Now, at that time, I was general foreman at large. And, no, I guess I was superintendent at that time. Anyway, I was out on the floor an awful lot. And I saw this chap snooping around. I went up to the foreman and I said, did he find a problem or something? Because he always held his head up so high and he'd go through. He never acknowledged hello or anything to anybody. He said, I don't know of any. He didn't say anything to me. Run along about 10 days, I believe. I got a call from Mr. Rollis. And he told me that he had received a letter. And the letter, he read the letter to me. And it said that we were setting this clutch assembly wrong and that there were going to be problems derived from it, unusual wear and so on. And Bob said he intimates that we ought to have a campaign and get these cars. Well, looking back on the thing, I said, good Lord, I think that's the morning we put the new guy to work.
Oh, okay.
And who signed this letter? Well, he told me. Well, I said, I remember the situation, Bob. I said, he was in here and he's snooping around, but he left and he never said a word. I said, you know, he's probably right. I haven't looked at the job, but he's probably right. But if he was right, we had an opportunity to corral every car that had been set in this plant, never having one shipped. And it's been 10 days that's gone by and we've shipped umpteen hundreds of cars that we're going to have dealers look at that could have been avoided. Well, Rollis suggests that I call Dorschmer, talk to him about it. I did. I don't think 10 minutes elapsed, though. This guy's on the phone. What did you tell my boss? Told him the facts. Something you neglect to do. Why didn't you talk to me?
Oh.
I said, now, wait a minute, stupid. Why didn't you talk to me? If there's anybody here that's at fault, you're at fault. I said, can I come over and talk to you? Certainly you can come over to talk to me. I'll be right here. He was over in very few minutes. He says, I nearly got fired. I said, you should have been. I said, I don't know anything about you as an engineer, but your attitude toward people stinks. Well, he was apologetic. He said, there will never, ever be a problem between you and I again. He said, if I find anything, you'll be the first to hear about it. And he was. He was good to his word. And I understand that in engineering groups, the guy was really singing my praises.
That's good.
But it took something like that to touch him off. I think he had too high a head.
Sometimes it happens.
Well, after all,
We're all here in the boat.
why, sure. Hell, I was only a upstart who was trying to do his job best he knew how. Never held myself above somebody else. And no reason to any more than he did.
Right.
You can be well educated. You can be very knowledgeable. But you can work with people too.
Right.
And after he learned to work with people, I understood that among his own people, he functioned a lot better. Well, I retired in 1st of May, 1979. It's been 11 years, and I can't believe it.
Goes by fast, doesn't it?
If someone said, how long you been retired, and I didn't stop to think, I might say a few years.
Mm-hmm.
You've jogged back a lot of memories, I'll tell you.
Well, that's good. You
Probably not all of them.
covered the subject very nicely. Did a good job, Ken.
You think back onto it, and back in 1955, I believe it was, we had a group picture taken of the people in the assembly plant. There were people in there like Osborne, Ted Ostrom, Adolph Fors, any number of people that were there at that time. Now, Huey Stanek is still alive, but Huey wasn't in the picture. He had left by that time to go to reliability. And but all that, there were 38 people in that picture, and there's only 4 of us alive.
Isn't that amazing?
Sure is, I'll tell you. Harold Spencer retired, and Harold was dead within 6 weeks.
Seems to happen to a fair amount of folks for some reason.
Paul George, I think, lived less than a year. Paul was a character, I'll tell you.
You ought to tell us about Paul, because I think that's he was an interesting man that needs to be.
Paul was,
Gravel voice.
old gravel voice was really, really something. I don't know. I think he might even been the world's biggest liar, but he believed it.
Yeah.
He said he had been in the cavalry in World War I. He might have been. I don't know, but I didn't think he was old enough. But Paul had some sayings that always stuck. Like, the bigger the hammer, the better the repairman.
Right.
I think probably the incident that I remember the best was Paul George. When we put the line that came down, let's see, Ditto was the head methods man, and Truxell had been working on the towing machine in 55. And Ditto and I got to talking one day, and I said to him, why couldn't we just draw those cars off the line and stick them back? And he said, that's what we got planned. I said, well, when we do that, couldn't we set the headlights at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ditto. Ditto was a guy that, boy, I tell you, no grass grew between his ears. That's all there was to it. He was sharp. But he was a funny guy. He either liked you or he didn't like you. And in my particular instance, we got along just great. Anyway, he came down one day and he said, hey, you really believe in that crossover situation that headlight will work? And I said, yeah, I really do. Well, he said, God, make it work. He said, we've got umpteen thousands of dollars tied up in that. He said, I sent in to get an estimate of what it would be, and they thought I wanted it built. And he said, it's built.
Okay.
Well, it worked. Worked good. But taking the cars off the line, as they come down, we would sometimes experience some problems with different tires. They might drag a little bit, and then the thing would jump. Well, Paul George says, ain't no use in that thing jumping that way. He said, it's just because that tire is gripping on that tire as it comes down there. And a little silicone will take care of that. So he got a 5-gallon can of silicone and a brush. He goes down the line and he's putting silicone on the thing. Well, the first one come off fairly good, but by that time, the treads are silicone. You know, as the thing goes along, the first time over, it wasn't so bad. But the second time over, the path was made and the slick was made on the thing. And all at once, this thing goes across and keeps right on going about halfway, and you're not being pulled by your tire. And I'll tell you, we had them to where they almost come over and banged one another. They slid so easy. And old Paul had to find something quick that would take the silicone off the track. And I never saw a guy so busy in my life. Well, that pulling it off the track as we did there was unique in the corporation, of course.
Those cross-transfer things.
We had them down so often that we really got pretty good about running them across and backing them up, putting them on the line without stopping the line. But Jim Edwards was the head of your methods department about that time.
Yeah.
And Truxell had done some operation onto it. They got this thing running. They're pulling the cars off. It wasn't too bad. A little scary.
Yeah.
We sat over on the south end of that line, and Jim Edwards said to me, what do you think of it? Well, I said, gee, it seems to be working, Jim. But what would happen if that sucker wouldn't stop? When an index, he never got a chance to answer. Boom, she starts going, boom, 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 just as fast as it could do.
It didn't stop. Huh?
It didn't stop. We had 4 cars on it, one on the line, 5 cars, and they ended up rolling like this. There was over here was a big a pillar, and they were coming up against that pillar, and the next one's coming underneath it, and they were just rolling each other over and over and over, and it went on for probably 3 to 5 minutes.
Before you get it shut off?
Before an electrician could get it shut off. And I am never going to forget Jim Edwards as long as I live. He just calmly turned to me and he says, that answer your question?
Oh my God.
I got the things cleared away. They've got all the problems worked out onto it. Well, Paul didn't really care too much for me, I think, in those days, because I was operating, I had 89 people as a foreman.
Oh my God.
Everybody else had 30 back down the line. But the way that from the front end on, it just didn't resolve itself to break it up very good. And I told Mike, get out of the way and let me paddle it.
Okay.
And Paul says to me, hey, you're changing general foreman, he said, in a week. And he said, I'm coming down. He said, you're not going to be the fair-haired boy you've been right along.
Uh-oh.
He said, you'll be working for old Paul. And I said, Paul, my opinion of you is you don't have brains enough to be my boss.
Oops.
So I'm not going to work for you. So I went up to the office and I told Minnow, I said, Paul coming down that area? He says, he is. Mike, I want to work for Paul. I said, before the day is over, I'd flatten him, and you know it. He said, we know. Uncle Bulgy and I have talked it over. That was Carl Lenz.
Oh, okay.
Carl was the assistant
All
superintendent.
right. Uncle Bulgy.
He said, he's got you taken care of. He said, go see him. So I went in. He said, yep. He says, you're going to take over the repair lines. Well, the repair lines were always taken over by Carl Jahaki on one and Huey Stanek on the other. But when old Ricks comes down to take them, he gets both of
Oh, God. Because you could do 89 guys.
them. Yeah. Divided up. They put 3 foremen in.
Uh-huh.
They put Joe Pavlet in at the front, put Ernie Clean in the middle, put Fred Ellison on the end.
Oh, my goodness.
And I went over and took over the repair lines. Huey went to reliability. Jahaki went down in the hole. Jahaki left us very shortly after that and went to Texas. When he wanted to come back, the old man wouldn't take him.
Oh, really?
I mean, these were his fair-haired boys,
Uh-huh.
but he found out after he got rid of them, I didn't need them.
Interesting.
Paul had a lot of good features about him. Paul was he was a doer, not a thinker.
Yeah.
If something come up that had a problem, Paul resolved it, but he didn't resolve it by thinking it over or looking at it ahead. He quite often got himself into real pickles, but at the same time, he kept the line going.
Fixed it.
You know, our main deal coming up with Minnow is keep that line moving.
Yeah. Did that philosophy change?
Not as long as I was.
So there wasn't, I mean, what I call the line quantity versus quality thing.
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Is that a issue there that was there?
We got quality. We were getting quality on the line. But it doesn't make any sense to me then, or it don't make any sense to me now, to stop a line that's got 1,500 people onto it, to let one man work 12 seconds longer on a job to get it done, when every time you stopped the line, you lost 22 seconds? Doesn't make sense. Have a way at the end, have repairmen down there, take it on and let 2 or 3 repairmen follow it down if necessary and finish it. You can afford 3 people a lot better than you can set 15 people down for 22 seconds.
Yeah.
That don't make sense. And their theory of stop a line if you're in trouble, good. Well, that's like giving you an invitation. Let's see how much we can create. And I'd give you my word. I think if I were working on a line, I'd be one of the guys who would figure out how we're going to work the deal so that nobody's going to get tagged here, but everybody's going to be cooperating. We're going to get a lot of downtime, boy.
Play the game.
Well, if they want to be stupid about it,
Yeah.
let's go stupid all the way.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the way Saturn's going to work, that's not good. The best way to do is to get the car off the line and work on it. You can afford to put 10 hours on it. He said you shut that line down. And the idea of pulling a car off, let's say you pull a car off on the body drop, and now you're going to work on that car. And you're going to get everything done on that body before you lower it down. But that means that a chassis, which has already been set way back here, has got to run around, either run around on the line, be taken off, or taken off in that line, and there'll be a hole there.
Right.
And sooner or later, you've got to run a hole to put that back into. So you lose 2. And that don't make sense. But some of these fogheads never could see that. No. If that item is written up, and if it's repaired properly, geez, to the best of my knowledge, every car that went off those lines, went out to the yard and was shipped, had all the repair done on it. We didn't get all that many complaints from customers. No, I know very well that the car that I got, I just bought a Silhouette. Oh, the cheap metal fittings and so on onto it is superb, but that's engineering.
Yeah.
Nobody fitted those by hammering the door forward,
Right.
or having to take a pry bar and pry back the fender and then beat it into place with a block of wood and a hammer. But we didn't, assumedly in those days, we didn't seem to have the knowledge how to do these sort of And actually, it goes right back to the basic design of the product. It's got to be designed in such a manner that it can be built that way. And they weren't always that way. It seemed that I know for very well fact that back in the 50s, when I first started working with Dolph over there, that there was a guy named Billy Mitchell who designed a body, and that's the way it was supposed to be looked at. And you never get away from this basic design. If the hood came out and made a hook and then made a curve in the end, that's the way Billy wanted them built.
Yeah, he was chief designer.
But love of heavens, you're familiar enough to know that when you take a sheet of steel and you press it, and then you pick it up, and you take another one, they're not identical. Maybe the one steel's got a little more spring back to it than another. One's softer. Or when the forming die comes around, or even just picking it out of the die, it can distort it. And then it's got to go through an operation where you put the reinforcements to it. If those reinforcements and stuff aren't done just exactly right with jigs, once the spot welder's taken it onto it, nothing's going to change that hood except the block hammer. And hopefully you can get it down there well enough that it's passable. Hey, we put a lot of cars out that we didn't like to put out. But we did them the very best they could be done, and nobody else was going to improve on them. The early cars didn't have any thought of water test at all, you know.
Oh, is that right?
This was an interesting deal in 1952. Someone got the bright idea that we ought to be looking at the water tests.
Never had one prior to that.
Never had one that way. So they built some water test booths. They run the cars through them, and an inspector riding into them would write up the varied leaks. Fisher Body put a bunch of people over here to try to stop those leaks. It got so bad that the yards were just plain filled with them.
Oh, my goodness.
There must have been hundreds of those cars were just turned loose because you didn't have anything else you could do with them and couldn't even look at them. You hadn't looked at them in the past, so let them go. It was in early 53 that Minnow finally came to me and asked me to take over that water test operation. It was getting winter, and we didn't have any repair area, so we made a repair area out in the yard.
Right.
They put up a wall at either end and put curtains across, and heated the place by 7 barrels of charcoal burning. Keep the pipes from freezing. That was hell on earth. We worked 13 and a half hours a day, 10 hours on Sunday. And I worked there from, first part of October till the following May.
Oh, my goodness.
We had Christmas Day off and New Year's Day off.
What were you doing? How were you fixing that?
Working around the clock with, I had a force of about 50 people from Fisher Body and 4 or 5 from Olds and the drivers. And you find the leaks and maybe put rubber behind rubber or something to bring it out. I remember the breaking point. The breaking point occurred in May of that year. We were swamped, absolutely swamped. And one noon, there was a salesman drove in, and he parked an old Plymouth in front of the water test booth. And the boys told him, hey, you better get that thing out of there. We go to work in 10 minutes. He said, I'll be out for that. He didn't get out there before that. What are you going to do, boss? I said, run the thing in the water test booth, turn it on, soak it up, and get it out of here. They run it in the water test booth, give it about 2 minutes, brought it out, and the guy says, "Hey, Chief, God," he says, "you're not going to believe this." He says, "I could spit through that door." But he said, when I'm in that water booth, he said, there wasn't any water in that car. You gotta be kidding. I jumped in there with him, put her back in there, turn her on. Sat there, and I'm telling you, you could almost spit through the door. No water come in.
Interesting.
Motors running. We always got the motors running because we're afraid to get wet, and drown them out.
Mm-hmm.
We got that thing out of there. I called the Fisher Body guy over, and I said, spring those doors. Get them so they just touch. That's all. See, they were trying to bring them in all the time and
Squash
the rubbers down and cut her off.
Yeah.
We put her in there, and I'll tell you, I don't know, it might have had 1 or 2 little small leaks on that car.
No kidding.
We were drawing a vacuum with our motors. It took us that long to find out we were drawing this vacuum. Hey, they had engineer after engineer down there with us too, to find out what we're going to do about this sucker. They were having these problems all throughout the corporation.
Isn't that something?
We were putting everything too tight. We loosened her up. No water.
And you had hundreds and thousands of cars you did.
Oh, good Lord, yes. And yet, looking back on that thing, the number of water test complaints were so minute. People just, they didn't think anything of it. We were running convertibles in those days too,
Yeah. So you're chasing a needle in a haystack.
Oh, yeah. Why, some of those doggone cars you had to take in, the driver would drive in the test booth, stay with the car, and they wanted rain pants because
They got that wet. Oh, God, that's terrible, Ken.
It was terrible. I tell you, it was terrible. And the yard would just be full of cars. You were lucky if you didn't change 20 fenders or so a day, because in piling cars into the yard, massing them up the way we were, and still trying to kick out, in 52, we were kicking out close to 100 cars an hour, probably 96 an hour, every hour. And all that traffic has got to go out through that old shipping gate that we had. It has never ceased to amaze me, even to this day, how good those drivers actually got to be. I don't know what they do for now. I know they still get repairs.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I know that they still send me the little magazine they got, and I read in there about the new methods they got, and I have to smile because I haven't as yet seen anything original in all the different things that they've got. The new quality methods and new quality controls. Nothing there is original.
Yeah.
But whoever's in there in power now, that's original to him, I guess.
That's right. Never did it before.
Never did it
Everything
before.
recycling. Been around, comes around.
No. I probably had the most original way to get rid of paper of anybody. I used to come in the morning, and Woody would have the mail piled up. And sometimes it would be up there. Well, I've always been a rapid reader. Extremely rapid. Comprehension level was high too. I would go through those things to the point to where Woody used to say, "Are you reading them or aren't you?" But I was reading them. But I had a way of doing it. This is trash. That way. This requires further thinking. Put it up there. This one here ought to be taken care of right away. So I have 3 piles. Well, this one would be very small. This one might be, quarter of an inch thick. This one over here would be 2 inches thick.
Scrap.
This one goes scrap. Now, this one here that needs looking into, it's placed over here. On the front portion of the desk, the wastepaper basket, second wastepaper basket lays there. During the course of the day, I would peruse it a little bit and just give some thought further onto it, do something about it. But after 3 days, if nothing here was done on this one here, I figured it didn't have to be done. I moved it over closer.
To the wastebasket.
Mooney came in one morning, just as I took it in my, it was the wastebasket. And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Those are the items that needed further study," and got it. He said, "You mean it won't need any attention at all?" Oh, I said, "There might be some of them in there that might need some attention." "Well, what do you do in that case?" Well, he said, if somebody says, "Why didn't you take care of this or that?" I say, "Hey, why don't you send me a copy?" So they send me one. I guess. He says, "Kenny," always call me Kenny.
Yeah.
"Kenny," he said, "I couldn't operate this place like you do." I said, "You sure as hell couldn't, Bob." He looks and he smiles. He says, "We won't argue with success."
Right. That's right. The proof's in the pudding.
God, I love that man like a brother, I'll tell you. He said to me when I retired, "Hey, anytime you ever want anything, call me." I wanted him to live, but he didn't.
He died.
I think it was only about 2.5 months. And you know, he had come back from Burns Clinic, I believe it was,
Mhm.
and he'd gone to,
Yeah.
with a perfect
Bill of health.
bill of health.
Okay. I know we were dumbfounded.
Never had had any heart problem. Well, I don't know that they ever ruled it. Definitely that it was heart disease.
That was my impression, but I don't know.
There was no autopsy for it. I know that.
Mm.
And Maryland wouldn't allow it.
Mm.
You know?
Mm.
We still keep in touch with her. She's quite a person.
Real tragedy.
You ever been up to Bob's house?
Never had.
Oh, it's a huge.
Yeah, I knew he'd
oh, that's a huge
The old one he built over here, I know, and added on and added on, and then went out there.
Bob has got bedrooms for all 11
Oh, yeah.
children and sleeping quarters in case each one of them have 11, I guess.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it.
I'm surprised that Marilyn carries on with it.
Yeah.
What a terrific person she is.
Mhm.
They had 7 boys in 6 years.
Poor lady.
He would come out to the farm, and he would bring them out. Boy number 1, Robert. Boy number 2. Boy number 3. He always called him, if he wanted one of them, he called him boy number 6 or boy number 2 or whatever he wanted. I heard a commotion on the back of the farm one time. They'd gone back hunting. And I went back there. Bob was standing by the car. I said, "What's the problem, Bob?" "It's all a holler." "Oh, God," he says, "we lost Kelly." Kelly was a Springer Spaniel
Oh, okay.
dog. He said, "Boys don't seem to have any luck getting him in here." And so I hate to go away and leave him, but he says, "It's getting dark." I said, "Boy, what kind of a Methodist man are you anyway, Bob?" "What are you talking about, kid?" Well, I said, "Listen, I hear Patrick way over there, corner. I hear Bobby over here in this corner. They're all calling Kelly. What would you do if you were Kelly?"
Sick.
Said, "You'd lay down. Kelly's out there in the marsh somewhere, laying down." And I said, "The first thing to do is call the boys in. Now, when you get them all here, then have them call Kelly." Out comes old Kelly. And Bob says, "There you go, Ken. Common sense." All right, guys. I was Farmer Ricks.
Well, farmers were good guys.
Well, I wasn't a farmer.
No, city farm.
I wasn't raised on a farm. But I do love my farm. I still do. Although I haven't seen much of it this year. I come home from Florida, and first thing I was going to do was go back and have a dock built on the pond. And I haven't been back to the pond yet.
Gracious.
Well, I got 2 reasons for it. I don't want to drive through the wheat field. And rheumatism, I don't want to walk a quarter of a mile back through the fields.
Mhm.
My kid said he'd put the rowboat back there, and I said, well, Dad, I tell you, or Gary, I said, I really don't feel confident enough, my stability and so on, to go back there and use the boat alone.
Mm.
And my wife don't want to go back there with me either.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll fish on the riverbank.
We're off the side of the pond.
I haven't fished since I've been home either, much as I love.
Well, Kenny, I think we've covered it.
I think we covered it, Jim.
You did a nice job. Appreciate it.
I've been talking. I brought back a lot of memories, I tell you.
Covered a lot of ground there that people hadn't talked about.
You asked me once there about Paul George. I remember Paul the last time I saw Paul alive. Jack McGinn and Jenny, or Mary, Jenny's his wife now, Mary, had their 25th wedding anniversary. And I held it in my little barn, which I had a dance hall, you know.
Oh, neat.
And they used to have parties out there.
Yeah.
And Paul came to it. And Paul got drinking quite heavily that day, but he had Louise with him. And Louise could drive. And Louise hadn't been drinking, so we let him go home. Paul stood there in the doorway, one arm like this, and one arm up like that, and he said, be seeing you guys. Be seeing you soon. And I hope it's not that soon, because Paul was dead 3 or 4 days
Oh my
later.
gosh.
I hope it isn't that soon.
Yeah.
But,
That's a shame. Yeah. But that happened. So, well, I have one other task, Ken, I'm going to ask you to do. We ask everybody to sign a release at the end of these things.
oh, sure.
So if you don't have a problem with that,
Oh, I don't have any problem with anything I said.
then I'll kill the recorder.